Welcome back, my friend. Before we start the video, I really need your support. The channel is going through a tough time, and your help means everything. Let's try to reach 1,000 likes and 1,000 comments. If everyone watching leaves just one like and one comment, we can easily make it happen. Don't forget to subscribe as well. And now, let's get started. The Alaskan wilderness stretched out before me, an endless sea of towering pines and rugged peaks. I adjusted my heavy backpack, the straps digging into my shoulders as I set off down the narrow trail. The musty scent of damp earth and decaying leaves filled my nostrils. As a park ranger, I was no stranger to these remote forests, but this time was different. I was alone, heading deep into the backcountry on a search and rescue mission. A solo hiker had been reported missing 3 days ago, last seen in this area. It was my job to find him. The canopy overhead grew thicker as I ventured further from civilization, the sunlight struggling to penetrate the dense foliage. An unnatural hush hung in the air, broken only by the occasional screech of a jay or the skittering of unseen creatures in the underbrush. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, though I knew I was likely the only human for miles. Strange how quickly the familiar could become foreign in the absence of company. The trees that had always felt like silent guardians now loomed ominously, their gnarled branches reaching out like clawed fingers. Shadows pooled between their trunks, hiding unknown threats. I consulted my map and compass, ensuring I was still on course. The missing hiker had planned to follow the winding Deer Creek Trail before cutting east toward a small lake. But he'd never made it to his destination. By the time I made camp that night, my nerves were raw and ragged. Every rustle of leaves or distant animal cry made me reach instinctively for the bear spray at my hip. I'd hiked until the last tendrils of twilight faded, determined to put as much distance as possible between myself and the abandoned boot. Now, hunkered down beside a meager fire, the weight of isolation pressed down on me. The forest beyond the flickering light was a void, fathomless and hungry. I clutched a mug of bitter instant coffee, more for the warmth than the caffeine. Sleep would be impossible tonight. Despite my exhaustion, I forced myself to review the facts of the case. The missing hiker, Jared Boone, was an experienced outdoorsman. He knew these woods, knew how to survive in them. What could have happened to make him leave the trail? And why hadn't he activated his emergency beacon? My thoughts circled endlessly, finding no answers. As I stared into the dancing flames, a sudden flicker of movement caught my eye. I leapt to my feet, senses on high alert. There, just at the edge of the firelight, a figure darting between the trees. "Hello?" I called out, my voice cracking. "Jared?" Silence. The figure was gone, vanished into the night. Had I imagined it? A trick of shadows and tired eyes? I sank back down, my breath coming hard and fast. Get it together, I told myself firmly. At first light, I broke camp and set off again. The rising sun did little to dispel the gloom beneath the dense canopy. As I walked, I scanned the ground for any sign of Jared's passing. Broken branches, a scrap of cloth snagged on a briar. But the forest kept its secrets until I saw the footprints. They appeared abruptly in a patch of mud just off the main trail. Boot prints sunk deep into the soft earth. My pulse quickened as I knelt to examine them. They were fresh, less than a day old, and they were heading east away from the trail, just as Jared had planned. But as I looked closer, a chill skittered up my spine. Beside Jared's prints were another set of tracks. Except they weren't human. Too long, too narrow, the toes tipped with wicked claws. Some kind of animal. I'd never seen anything like them. The hairs on the back of my neck prickled as I stood slowly. Jared hadn't been alone out here. Something had been stalking him, hunting him. And now it seemed I was its new prey. I followed the tracks warily, every sense straining for signs of danger. The forest grew thicker, the air heavy and oppressive. The footprints wove an erratic path, as if Jared had been running, desperate to escape his pursuer. And then they simply vanished. No sign of a struggle, no traces of blood. Just an abrupt end, like Jared had been plucked from the earth. A sour taste flooded my mouth as a horrifying possibility occurred to me. What if the creature could... A twig snapped behind me. I spun, my hand flying to my bear spray. A figure emerged from the shadows, and I felt a surge of relief. Another human. The old man regarded me warily, his weathered face creased with suspicion. He was dressed in faded flannel and mud-caked boots, a battered rifle slung over one shoulder. "You shouldn't be out here," he said flatly. It wasn't a threat, but a simple statement of fact. "I'm a ranger," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm looking for a missing hiker. Jared Boone." At the name, something flickered in the old man's eyes. fear, or maybe something worse. He took a step back, shaking his head. "Ain't no use," he muttered. "He's gone. And you will be too, you don't turn back now." A chill slithered down my spine. "What do you mean, gone? Do you know what happened to him?" The old man looked away, his jaw tight. "There's things in these woods," he said softly. "Things that ain't natural, things that hunger." He met my gaze then, and the look in his eyes turned my blood to ice, and right now, they're hunting you. Before I could respond, he melted back into the trees, leaving me alone once more, alone with only the wind and the watching woods, and the growing certainty that I was walking into a nightmare from which there might be no waking. As I hiked, I scanned the forest floor for any signs of disturbance. Broken branches, trampled vegetation, a scrap of litter. But the trail was pristine, almost too pristine, an uneasy voice whispered in my mind, like the land itself was conspiring to conceal what had happened here. The shadows lengthened as afternoon crept toward evening. I'd need to make camp soon, find shelter before darkness descended. A sudden gust of wind rattled the branches above me and I shivered, zipping my jacket up to my chin. The temperature was dropping fast. I quickened my pace, unnerved by the deepening gloom. Every snap of a twig made me flinch, my nerves strung taut as a bow. I laughed softly, trying to dispel my unease.
"Get a grip," I chided myself.
"You've done this 100 times. As I rounded a bend in the trail, I stumbled to a halt. There, in the middle of the path, was a single hiking boot. Worn and caked with mud, the laces snapped. It hadn't been there a moment ago. Cold sweat prickled along my spine as I knelt to examine it. The boot was old, the leather cracked and peeling. It might have belonged to the missing hiker, but something about it felt wrong. A sense of wrongness that made my skin crawl. Some primeval instinct urging me to flee. With shaking fingers, I turned the boot over. The heel had been shredded as if by the claws of some huge animal. No, not an animal. The gashes were too precise, too deliberate. Dread knotted in my gut as I stood, the boot dangling from my hand. Something had placed it here. A warning. I looked wildly around, pulse thundering in my ears. The forest was utterly silent now, like a held breath. Waiting. Watching. I had to keep moving. Find the hiker. Get us both out of here. Before it was too late. I set off at a near run, adrenaline charging through my veins, the wrongness of the boot seared into my mind. Darkness gathered at the edges of my vision, and I fought the urge to look over my shoulder. I was no longer alone in this forest, and I had a terrible feeling I would soon wish I had never set foot in it at all. The old man's warning echoed in my mind as I pressed deeper into the wilderness, following the last known coordinates of Jared's GPS signal. The rational part of my brain insisted there had to be a logical explanation. Bears maybe, or wolves. But another voice, more insistent, whispered of older things, darker things that defied reason and science. I checked my compass again, frowning. The needle wavered erratically, refusing to settle on a direction. Useless. I'd have to rely on dead reckoning and the position of the sun. Except the sun was sinking fast, painting the sky in lurid shades of orange and red. Soon I'd be navigating by darkness and starlight. As I hiked, I began to notice other signs of wrongness. Saplings twisted into unnatural shapes, their branches contorted as if in agony. Gnarled roots that seemed to writhe and reach across the forest floor, grasping at my boots. And everywhere a sepulchral hush, broken only by the occasional skitter of falling leaves. My breath came harder as the terrain grew steeper, the soil loose and crumbling beneath my feet. Sweat plastered my hair to my forehead, though the air held a wintry chill. Just a little further, I told myself. Just a little. A sudden piercing scream shattered the silence. I froze, heart hammering against my ribs. It had sounded close, no more than 100 yards away. And it had sounded human. "Jared?" I shouted, my voice raw with fear. "Jared, is that you?" Another scream rent the air, more animal than human, a sound of pure primal terror. And then, abruptly, silence fell once more. I began to run, heedless of the branches that clawed at my face and arms. I had to find him, had to help. Even as some deeper instinct screamed at me to flee, to run as far and as fast as I could. I burst into a small clearing and stumbled to a halt, my breath sawing in my lungs. There, at the base of a lightning-blasted tree, was a backpack. Jared's backpack. It had been torn open, the contents scattered across the ground. With shaking hands, I knelt to examine the debris. A shredded sleeping bag, a smashed GPS unit, and blood, dark and glistening, splashed across dead leaves. So much blood. Bile rose in my throat as I staggered to my feet. I had to call for backup, had to. A low growl rumbled from the shadows at the edge of the clearing. I turned slowly, dread knotting in my gut. Two eyes glowed in the gathering dusk, far too large to be any normal beast. As I watched, frozen with horror, the thing emerged from the trees. It was the size of a bear, but no bear moved with such sinuous grace. Its body was covered in oily black fur that seemed to absorb the fading light. And its face, dear God, its face, where there should have been a snout, a muzzle. There was instead a grotesque parody of a human visage, skin the sickly white of a bloated corpse, lips peeled back from jagged yellow teeth in a leering grin. The creature took a step forward, its eyes burning with a feral, malevolent intelligence. A broken sob tore from my throat as I scrabbled for my bear spray, knowing it would be useless. This was no animal. This was something out of a nightmare, a horror that defied all laws of nature. I turned to run, but my boot caught on a root and I fell hard, the breath exploding from my lungs. In an instant, the creature was on me, its fetid breath hot against my face. I closed my eyes, waiting for the slash of claws, the crushing snap of jaws, but the blow never came. Instead, I heard a low, guttural voice rasping from vocal cords never meant for human speech. Not yet, it hissed. More fear. And then the weight was gone, the presence retreating. I lay there shaking as the creature melted back into the shadows, leaving me broken and alone in the darkening forest. It was toying with me, savoring my terror like a rare delicacy, and I knew with a bone-deep certainty that it would be back. As the last of the light faded, I staggered to my feet, my mind reeling. I had to find shelter, had to regroup and think, but the truth pulsed like a cancer in my mind, inescapable and damning. There would be no rescue, no salvation, only the hunt, and the horror that awaited me in the dark. I don't know how long I stumbled through the darkness, my mind numb with shock and exhaustion. Time seemed to lose all meaning in this place, the minutes bleeding into hours, the hours into an endless nightmare eternity. At last, my legs simply gave out beneath me and I collapsed at the base of a towering fir, my chest heaving with silent sobs. I couldn't outrun the creature. I couldn't fight it. All I could do was try to survive the night. With fumbling hands, I unzipped my pack and retrieved my emergency shelter, a small, one-person tent. As I struggled to assemble it in the dark, every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig made me flinch, my heart leaping into my throat. I could feel unseen eyes on me, hungry and malevolent. Finally, the tent was up. I crawled inside, zipping the flap closed with shaking fingers. The thin nylon seemed a pitifully flimsy barrier against the horrors that lurked outside, but it was all I had. Curled into a fetal position, I tried to quiet my ragged breathing. I needed to think, to plan, but my thoughts kept circling back to Jared, to the blood-soaked clearing. The creature had taken him just as it would take me. It was only a matter of time. As I lay there, I became aware of a new sound, barely audible over the hammering of my own heart. A low rhythmic whisper, rising and falling like the rush of a distant stream. At first I thought it was only the wind in the branches, but as I listened, a chill crept over my skin. There were words in that whispering, guttural and alien, in a language never meant for human tongues. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. They seemed to come from all around me, pressing against the fragile walls of the tent. I clapped my hands over my ears, but I couldn't shut them out. They burrowed into my mind like insects, crawling and gnawing. Images flashed behind my eyelids, vivid and terrifying. I saw the creature, its pale, leering face looming over me. I saw Jared, his body broken and bloody, his eyes wide and staring. And I saw myself running, always running, through a forest that had no end. I must have fallen into an exhausted, fitful sleep, because I jerked awake to find pale dawnlight filtering through the walls of the tent. For a moment I simply lay there, my body aching, my mind struggling to piece together the fragments of nightmare and reality. Then I saw the claw marks. 3 long, jagged gashes ripped through the nylon just inches from my face. The creature had been here, crouched over me as I slept, playing with me, savoring my terror. A choked sound halfway between a laugh and a sob escaped my lips. It knew I was helpless, trapped in this tent like a rabbit in a snare. It could have taken me at any moment, but it chose not to, because it was hungry for more than flesh. It was hungry for the hunt, for the slow, delicious unraveling of my sanity, and I was utterly at its mercy. With a shaking hand, I reached for my canteen, suddenly parched. But when I uncapped it, I recoiled in horror. The water was thick and dark with a coppery, fetid smell. Blood. The creature had filled my canteen with blood. I retched, my empty stomach heaving. This couldn't be happening. It had to be another nightmare, a delusion. But the blood was real, splashed across my hands, soaking into the floor of the tent. Frantic now, I tore through my pack, searching for my radio, my GPS, anything that could connect me to the outside world. But everything was gone, replaced by a tangle of shredded wires and cracked plastic. And coiled in the center like a glistening, obscene trophy was a long strip of ragged, blood-crusted skin, human skin. A keening wail built in my throat as the full horror crashed over me. The creature wasn't just stalking me. It was inside my mind, violating the very sanctity of my thoughts, distorting reality until I could no longer trust my own senses. I had to get out, had to keep moving. I couldn't let it break me, couldn't let it win. With a burst of desperate strength, I clawed my way free of the tent and stumbled out into the waiting forest, the taste of blood and terror thick on my tongue. The hunt was far from over. It had only just begun. I ran, heedless of direction or destination, driven by pure, primal terror. Branches lashed at my face, roots clawed at my ankles, but I barely felt them. All I knew was the need to escape, to put as much distance as possible between myself and the unspeakable thing that pursued me. But even as I fled, I could feel its presence, never far behind. The forest itself seemed to warp and twist around me, the trees bending their limbs to block my path, the undergrowth clutching at my legs like grasping hands. It was as if the very wilderness had become an extension of the creature's will, a living, malevolent labyrinth that existed only to trap and torment me. My lungs burned, my heart pounded, but still I ran. I had no plan, no hope of rescue. I was a rat in a maze, scurrying frantically from one dead end to the next, while the cat toyed with me, savoring my futile struggles. And then, just when I thought my body could take no more, I burst out of the tree line and found myself at the edge of a steep ravine. I skidded to a halt, pebbles cascading into the void before me. Far below, a river surged between jagged rocks, its roar echoing off the canyon walls. I spun around, my back to the abyss, as a shadow detached itself from the trees. The creature stalked forward, its movements fluid and sinuous, its pale eyes glinting with a feral, malevolent intelligence. In the stark daylight, I could see the full horror of its form. The mottled, leathery skin stretched over bulging muscles, the elongated limbs tipped with scythe-like claws, the lipless mouth filled with needle-sharp teeth. It had shed any pretense of humanity, revealing itself in all its grotesque, predatory glory. And yet, even as revulsion and horror twisted my gut, I could sense something else beneath the surface, a dark, seductive pull, a whisper that spoke to some primal, buried part of my own psyche. The creature took another step forward, its nostrils flaring as it drank in my scent. I could see the hunger in its eyes, but also something more. Curiosity, amusement, as if my terror were a fine wine to be savored, my sanity, a delicacy to be slowly unwrapped. "What are you?" I managed to choke out, the words feeling thick and clumsy on my tongue. The thing cocked its head, a horribly human gesture. When it spoke, its voice was a rasping, guttural parody of speech, layered with undertones no human vocal cords could produce. "We are the hungry ones," it said, "the eaters of flesh, the drinkers of fear. Your kind has known us by many names, in many tongues. Wendigo, skinwalker, Nalusaphalaya." It took another step, its claws flexing, gouging furrows in the rocky soil. "For centuries we have stalked your kind, feeding on your terror, growing strong on your despair. You are our prey, our playthings, and this forest is our hunting ground." I shook my head in desperate denial, even as the awful truth sank in like a splinter of ice. The missing hikers, the abandoned campsites, the whispered legends. All of it pointed to an evil older and more primal than anything I had ever imagined. The creature was close now, its fetid breath hot on my face. I could see the anticipation in its eyes, the cruel pleasure it took in my hopeless defiance. It knew I had nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. It had me exactly where it wanted me. I glanced behind me at the churning rapids far below. A desperate, insane thought flickered through my mind. Better a quick death than the slow, savoring horror the creature promised. Better to deny it its final victory. The thing seemed to sense my intention. Its lips peeled back in a snarl, revealing rows of jagged teeth. "No," it hissed. "You will not cheat us of our sport. You will run and you will scream and you will beg, and when the last of your strength is gone, when the last of your hope is dead, then and only then will we feast." It lunged, claws outstretched, and I, with a wordless cry of defiance and despair, flung myself into the abyss, the creature's howl of rage chasing me down into the roaring dark. The icy water shocked the breath from my lungs, tumbled me head over heels in its relentless current. I had no strength left to fight, no will to struggle towards the surface. As the darkness closed in, as the river dragged me down into its cold embrace, my last thought was a prayer, not for survival, not for rescue, but for release. I don't know how long I drifted in that icy darkness, tossed like a leaf in the current. Time lost all meaning, and I slipped into a numb, dreamless oblivion, my mind finally fleeing the horror my body could not escape. When I opened my eyes again, I was lying on a rocky riverbank, the pale sun glinting off the water. Every muscle screamed in protest as I dragged myself to my feet, my sodden clothes hanging heavy and chill against my skin. I had survived the river. But for what? To wander lost and alone, waiting for the hungry ones to find me again, to play out the final act in their twisted game of cat and mouse? A wave of despair crashed over me, so intense it drove me to my knees. I couldn't do this anymore. I couldn't run, couldn't fight. All I wanted was for it to be over, one way or another. And then, through the haze of exhaustion and hopelessness, I saw it. A cabin, tucked into the trees a short distance from the river bank. It was old and weathered, its logs silver gray with age, but it looked solid, sturdy. A sudden, desperate hope kindled in my chest. If I could get inside, bar the door, it wouldn't stop the creatures forever, but it might buy me time. Time to rest, to think, to plan. It was a slim chance, but it was the only one I had. I half stumbled, half crawled towards the cabin, my legs threatening to give out with every step. The door was unlocked, and I nearly sobbed with relief as I staggered inside, slamming it shut behind me and slumping against it. The interior was dark and musty, lit only by the thin shafts of sunlight that slanted through the dirt-streaked windows. A single room with a cold, soot-stained fireplace, a rickety table and chair, a narrow cot. And scattered across every surface like a macabre confetti, bones, small bones bleached and picked clean, larger ones still mottled with scraps of withered flesh, and skulls, their empty sockets staring in silent accusation, human skulls. The breath froze in my lungs, my mind reeling. This wasn't a safe haven. It was a larder, a trophy room. How many had the hungry ones lured here to play out their sadistic games? How many had huddled in this very spot, desperate and terrified, waiting for the end? As I stood there, paralyzed with horror, my eyes fell on something else. A leather-bound journal, tucked into a crevice near the fireplace as if hidden in haste. With shaking hands, I retrieved it, brushing off the cobwebs and dust. The pages crackled with age as I opened it, the ink faded but still legible. It was a record, a testament. The final words of the creature's previous victims, stretching back decades, even centuries. I read, my heart pounding as the awful truth unfolded before me. The hungry ones weren't just predators. They were something far older, far more insidious. Spirits, demons that fed on human suffering the way we fed on meat and bread. They had stalked these woods since time immemorial, growing stronger, more cunning with each passing year. And they had helpers, human servitors who worshipped them as gods, who lured the unwary into their clutches with false tales and empty promises of aid. The old man, the one who had warned me. Had he been one of them, leading me like a lamb to the slaughter? One passage, scrawled in a shaking hand, leapt out at me. They cannot be killed, cannot be escaped. They are the forest, and the forest is them. The only hope is to become like them, to embrace the hunger, the hunt. Only then can you hope to survive. I let the journal fall from my nerveless fingers, a numb horror settling over me. Was that my fate, then? To become the thing I feared, the thing I hated? To damn myself in order to survive? The shadows lengthened as I sat there, the day bleeding away into a bloody twilight, and with the darkness came the whispers, insidious and seductive, worming their way into my mind. Give in, they murmured. Surrender. Embrace the hunger. It is the only way. The only way. I pressed my hands to my ears, but I couldn't shut them out, because some part of me, the part that was tired and hurt and so desperately afraid, That part wanted to listen. As the last of the light faded, I huddled in the corner of the cabin, lost and alone, as the voices of the hungry ones gathered around me like vultures around a corpse, waiting for me to break, waiting for me to fall, and in that moment I didn't know if I had the strength to resist. Night fell, and with it came the scratching at the door. It started softly, almost tentatively, like the pawing of an inquisitive animal, but it quickly grew in intensity, until it sounded like claws raking across the weathered wood, leaving deep splintered gouges. They were here, the hungry ones, come to claim their prize. I huddled in the farthest corner of the cabin, my arms wrapped around my knees, trying to make myself as small as possible, as if I could disappear entirely, fade into the shadows and escape their notice. But I knew it was futile. They could smell my fear, taste my desperation. It drew them like sharks to blood in the water. The scratching stopped, replaced by a heavy, expectant silence, and then a voice speaking softly, almost tenderly. "Let us in, little one. Let us end your suffering. It will only hurt for a moment, and then you will be free." I recognized that voice. It was Jared's voice, but warped and twisted, layered with dark undercurrents no human throat could produce. The creature was mimicking him, using his memory as a weapon against me. Anger surged through me, hot and bright, momentarily eclipsing my terror. How dare they violate him like this, puppeting his image for their own cruel amusement? "Leave me alone," I shouted, my voice cracking. "You're not him. You're not Jared." A low, grating chuckle. "No, we are not. We are so much more. Don't you understand yet? We are everything you fear, everything you dread. We are the shadow in the corner of your eye, the breath on the back of your neck. We are the end, and the end is coming for you." The door shuddered, the hinges shrieking as something immensely strong battered against it from the other side. The lock held for now, but I knew it was only a matter of time. I cast my eyes around the cabin, searching desperately for something, anything that could serve as a weapon. But there was nothing, only bones and dust and the creeping, insidious whispers that clawed at the edges of my mind. The door gave way with a splintering crack, and it was there, framed in the doorway. The hungry one in all its terrible, twisted glory, but it was not alone. Flanking it, their faces pale and eyes glinting with a feral light, were the missing hikers. Jared, the old man, and others I didn't recognize, men and women, their clothing ragged and skin streaked with dirt and blood. The creature had turned them, broken them, made them a part of its own demented pack. I opened my mouth to scream, but no sound emerged. I could only watch, paralyzed as they advanced, their movements jerky and unnatural, like marionettes dancing to a mad puppeteer's tune. The hungry one glided forward, its pale eyes boring into mine. In their depths I saw centuries of hunger, of cruelty, an endless yawning void that would swallow me whole and leave nothing behind. It reached out one gnarled, taloned hand, caressing my cheek almost gently. Its touch burned like ice, like fire, and I felt myself falling into that gaze, drowning in it. "Don't fight," it whispered, its breath fetid and cold. "Don't struggle. You are ours now, as you were always meant to be, one of us, and God help me, in that moment I wanted to give in. I wanted the fear to end, the pain to stop. I wanted to sink into that darkness and let it consume me, devour me. It would be so easy to just let go. But some stubborn, defiant spark within me refused to be extinguished. Some primal human part of me that looked into the face of the abyss and whispered, "No, not like this. Not yet." With a wordless cry, I lashed out, my fist connecting with the creature's jaw. Pain exploded up my arm, but the hungry one reeled back, more startled than hurt. I leapt to my feet, adrenaline surging through my veins, lending me a desperate, fleeting strength. The pack circled, snarling, but in their eyes I saw a flicker of something new, something like respect. I had fought back. I had surprised them, and maybe, just maybe, that was enough to give me a chance. My mind raced, fragments of the journal's passages flashing through my thoughts. "Become like them," it had said. "Embrace the hunger." I didn't know if I could do that, if I could cross that final line and retain any shred of my humanity. But in that moment, poised on the knife's edge between surrender and defiance, I made a choice. I would fight. I would run, and if the end came, I would meet it on my feet. With a feral howl of my own, I charged forward, into the reaching claws and snapping teeth of the hungry ones, into the jaws of the beast, and the hunt began anew. I crashed through the underbrush, thorny branches lashing at my face and arms, roots seeming to twist and grasp at my ankles. Behind me, the baying of the pack grew louder, more frenzied. They were toying with me, I knew. They could have caught me in an instant, dragged me down like a wounded deer, but they wanted to prolong the chase to savor my terror and desperation. My lungs burned, my muscles screamed, but I pushed myself harder, faster. I had no destination, no plan. All I knew was that to stop was to die, or worse, to become one of them, a twisted mockery of life, forever enslaved to the hunger that gnawed at their bones. I burst into a clearing and skidded to a halt, my heart leaping into my throat. Before me, the ground fell away in a sheer cliff, plunging down into a sea of mist-shrouded pines, a dead end. I spun around, searching frantically for another path, but it was too late. They emerged from the trees, eyes glinting, fangs bared in feral grins, the hungry ones with their newly turned minions. Jared, his once kind face now a mask of predatory glee. The old man, cackling and capering, all pretense of frailty abandoned. And at their head, the creature itself, tall and terrible, its form seeming to flicker and shift in the shadows. It stepped forward, claws flexing, pale eyes boring into mine. "End of the line, little rabbit," it rasped, its voice a grating, sepulchral rattle. "No more running. No more fighting. It is time to accept your fate." I backed away, pebbles skittering over the edge of the cliff behind me. The mist swirled, icy tendrils coiling around my ankles as if the very air sought to bind and trap me. The creature cocked its head, a mockery of curiosity. "Why do you resist?" it mused. "You have seen our power, tasted our hunger. You know there is no escape. Why not embrace it? Become one with the hunt as you were always meant to be?" For a moment I wavered. The whispers in my mind grew louder, more insistent, promising an end to the fear, the pain, the grief, promising strength and speed and savage, searing joy. All I had to do was let go, give in to the darkness that pulsed at the core of my being. But even as I teetered on the brink, some stubborn spark within me refused to be extinguished, some flicker of defiance, of humanity that looked into the abyss and whispered, "No, not now, not ever." I met the creature's gaze, and in that moment I saw myself reflected in its eyes. Not as I was, but as I could be, wild and feral, forever bound to the hunt, devouring and destroying until the end of days, and I made my choice. "I'll never be like you," I whispered, my voice steady despite the terror that thrummed through my veins. "I'll never give in to the hunger. I am human, and I will die human." The creature recoiled, hissing as if my words were a physical blow. Then its lipless mouth peeled back in a snarl, revealing rows of needle-sharp teeth. "So be it," it growled. "Die then. Die and be forgotten." It lunged, claws outstretched, and I leapt backwards out into empty air. For a moment I hung suspended, the wind rushing past me, the world tilting and spinning. I saw the creature's face contorted in rage and disbelief. I saw the pack, surging forward, howling in frustrated bloodlust. And then I was falling, plunging down into the mist-shrouded depths of the forest. The last thing I heard was my own voice raised in a final defiant scream, a cry of rage, of sorrow, of wild, untamed joy, and then silence, darkness, peace. I don't know how I survived the fall. I don't know how long I lay there, broken and bleeding, drifting in and out of consciousness. Hours, maybe. Days. When I finally awoke, I was alone, the forest still and silent around me. I never saw the hungry ones again, never heard their howls echoing through the trees, or felt their icy breath on the back of my neck. But I know they're still out there, waiting, watching, forever bound to the hunt. As for me, I survived and returned to the world of the living, forever changed. The scars I bear are not just physical, but mental, emotional, spiritual. I am haunted in a way I can never fully explain. Haunted by the memory of the abyss that opened up before me, and the part of me that yearned to let it swallow me whole. But I am also stronger. Stronger for having looked into the face of the beast and refused to blink, for having clung to my humanity, even as it threatened to slip away. I know I'll never be free of the forest, not really. It's a part of me now, as surely as the blood in my veins and the breath in my lungs. But I also know that I am more than what it tried to make me, more than the fear, the hunger, the despair. I am human, flawed and fragile, but unbroken, and in the end that was enough. The forest keeps its secrets, and I keep mine. But sometimes in the deepest watches of the night I find myself straining to hear the distant baying of the hungry ones. wondering if they too remember, wondering if they too still hunger. The gravel crunched beneath my boots as I made my way down the overgrown access road, the forest pressing in close on either side. It was late August, the peak of the hiking season now passed, and I had set out alone on an extended backcountry patrol through this remote corner of the park. As one of the most experienced rangers on staff, I often got tasked with these long solo treks to check trail conditions and make sure no campers or climbers had gotten themselves into trouble out in the vast wilderness. Normally, I relished the solitude and beauty of these journeys. But something felt different this time. A heaviness hung in the air, the birdsong and chatter of squirrels noticeably absent. Even the wind seemed muted as it sighed through the spruce and hemlock boughs above. I tried to shake off the strange feeling, chalking it up to the extra helping of powdered eggs I'd had for breakfast at the ranger station. But as I continued hiking, the subtle wrongness only intensified. Trails that should have been well-maintained were faint and fading, the footpath nearly reclaimed by encroaching ferns and devil's club. At one stream crossing, the log bridge had collapsed into a rotten hulk, forcing me to pick my way carefully across loose river rocks. Had a harsh winter taken out the bridge? But then why hadn't it been repaired or replaced over the summer? A cold trickle ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the chill mist coming off the water. As I climbed the far bank, I spotted something through the trees that made me stop in my tracks. A flash of unnatural color out of place among the endless shades of green and brown. Frowning, I pushed through a tangle of salmonberry bushes to take a closer look. There, snagged on a devil's club stem, fluttered a ragged scrap of bright orange tent fabric. I plucked it free, examining the frayed edges. It looked like it had been torn off in a struggle. Glancing around warily, I couldn't see any other signs of an old campground or human presence. Just that lonely shred left hanging in the underbrush like a warning flag. A sudden gust sent the trees groaning and creaking around me. The back of my neck prickled with the unmistakable sensation of being watched from the shadows. Shoving the bit of tent into my jacket pocket, I hoisted my pack and hurried up the trail. As much as I tried to dismiss it as imagination, I couldn't shake the growing certainty that I was no longer alone out here in the backcountry, that something else now moved unseen between the ancient trunks, following silently in my footsteps, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. The forest already felt less welcoming, less familiar, the friendly face I'd known transforming into something darker and more ominous with each step I took deeper into the trees. Around mid-afternoon, I crested a ridge and began descending into a lush river valley, aiming to reach a ranger cabin on the far side by nightfall. The uneasy feeling had only grown stronger as the day wore on, and I found myself jumping at every rustle and animal call emanating from the undergrowth. Rounding a switchback, I came to an abrupt halt at the sight before me. There in the middle of the trail, clearly imprinted in a patch of damp soil, was a set of large, bizarrely misshapen tracks. My brow furrowed as I knelt down for a closer inspection. At first glance, they resembled wolf prints, but the proportions were all wrong, too elongated, with splayed toes and wickedly curved claws that dug deep furrows in the earth. No wolf I knew of left marks like these. As I studied the tracks, a wave of unease washed over me. Some primal instinct deep in my brain screamed that whatever made these was no ordinary creature of the forest. A twig snapped in the underbrush nearby, and I leapt to my feet, my hand reflexively going to the bear spray on my hip. But instead of a hulking animal, a stooped human figure emerged from the salmonberry thicket. It was an old man, his long gray hair twisted into unkempt braids, his brown skin heavily creased and weathered. He wore a tattered army surplus jacket festooned with bits of bone and what looked unsettlingly like strips of dried hide. The stranger regarded me solemnly, dark eyes glinting beneath a prominent brow. "You ought not be out here alone, Ranger," he said, his voice low and raspy. "Not this time of year. Not with what's been stirring lately." I frowned, unsure what to make of his cryptic warning. "What do you mean?" "What's been stirring?" The old man glanced around warily before leaning in closer, his breath sour and tinged with tobacco. "The Kushtaka. They grow bold again, hungry for the flesh of the wayward and unwary, stalking these lands as in the old times." A chill ran through me at the unfamiliar word. It sounded like something from the language of the local Tlingit tribes, but its meaning eluded me. Before I could press the stranger further, a piercing cry echoed across the valley. sending a shock of icy adrenaline surging in my veins. It sounded almost human, but warped and distorted in a way that made the hairs on my arms stand up. I whirled to scan the tree line on the far side of the river, my heart suddenly hammering against my ribcage. There, for the briefest of moments, I glimpsed a large, shadowy shape slipping between the trunks before it vanished into the dark spaces of the forest. "Did you see that?" I asked, my voice shaking slightly. But when I turned back, the old man had vanished as suddenly and silently as he had appeared. Only the uncanny tracks remained, a tangible reminder that something was very wrong in this isolated wilderness. With a growing sense of dread, I forced my leaden feet forward, following the trail as it wound down toward the river. But even the burbling rush of water over stones could not mask the sensation of being watched, stalked by an increasingly bold and unnatural presence in the woods. As the light began to fade and shadows pooled beneath the trees, I could not shake the feeling that the true nature of these forests, the dark folklore slumbering in their depths, was just beginning to awaken, and I was utterly alone and unprepared for what the coming night would bring. The last embers of daylight were fading to indigo by the time I dropped my pack on the porch of the remote ranger cabin. A spiderweb zigzagged across a frame of the single dusty window, and hinges squealed as I tugged open the heavy wooden door. The one-room shack appeared abandoned, a layer of grime coating every surface. I forced down the unease seeping through my veins and focused on starting a fire in the cobwebbed stone hearth. As the kindling began to crackle, a flickering orange glow pushed back the gloom and revealed more unsettling details. Overturned furniture, claw marks gouged into the walls, dark stains splattered across the floorboards that looked uncomfortably like old bloodstains. It was clear something bad had happened here, but the scene was cold. The violence now drifted into the murky distance of forest time. Trying to ignore the mess, I heated up a Spartan dinner on my camp stove. But as I choked down the last of the flavorless dehydrated beans, the lights began to flicker and strobe, the bulb in the old oil lamp sputtering on its last fumes. With a resigned sigh, I unrolled my sleeping bag on the rough-hewn bunk. I'd find out soon enough what transpired in this ill-omened place. For now I needed rest, a brief respite before the true trials began. Unsettling noises echoed outside the cabin walls as I drifted into an uneasy sleep. Guttural animal cries mixed with disturbingly human-like wails, snarls and howls that almost resolved into coherent whispers. Through it all, I dreamed of eyes, dozens of them, glinting in the firelight just beyond the edge of my vision. Watching, unblinking, until they winked out one by one and left me alone in the haunted dark. That night, the Kushtaka walked boldly between the ancient trees, no longer bothering to camouflage its presence. It knew as well as I that a confrontation was inevitable now. The only question was whether I could survive the horrors it would bring. I jerked awake with a strangled gasp, my sleeping bag tangled around me in damp, clammy coils. For a moment I didn't know where I was, still half trapped in the disturbing dream world of glinting eyes and grasping dark. Then the close, musty confines of the cabin filtered back into focus, and I exhaled slowly, waiting for my thundering heart to calm. It was still full dark outside, the fire long since burned down to faint red embers in the hearth. An eerie silver-green light spilled through the grimy window, and I belatedly recognized it as moonlight shining through the dense tree cover. What had torn me from sleep? Some nightmare already fading from memory? But then I heard it. A soft, rhythmic thump coming from just outside the door like footsteps crunching over dry pine needles. Fear dripped down my spine as I held myself perfectly still under the heavy wool blankets, my breath coming in shallow pants. Another branch snapped under a heavy tread and my heart lurched into my throat. Something was out there circling the cabin, stalking me. As I strained my ears to track the intruder's progress, a new sound filtered through the thin log walls. A guttural clicking halfway between insectile and animal. It skittered across the roof, pattered down the exterior walls, seemed to echo from all around in a dizzying cacophony. My pulse roared in my ears as I tried to make sense of the alien racket, growing louder and more frenzied with each passing second. Then, abruptly as it began, the noise cut off. For a span of heartbeats, the night was preternaturally silent. Even the owls and frogs had fallen mute. I hardly dared to breathe, wondering if the thing had given up and retreated to the forest depths. A sudden burst of harsh, cawing laughter shattered the hush, so human-like it raised every hair on my body on end. "Ranger!" a voice croaked from the darkness, drawing out the syllables in mocking sing-song. "Come out and play!" It knew I was here. Worse, it sounded like a parody of human speech, as if this creature had studied our language and twisted it for its own horrific purposes. I could picture its misshapen mouth forming the words, jaw unhinging like a snake's to let the taunting challenge slither out. Fighting down a surge of nausea, I reached a trembling hand for my flashlight on the nightstand. My fingers probed the wooden surface, finding only a scattering of leaf litter and foul, sticky filth. The flashlight was gone, and as I peered closer, I realized the debris wasn't leaves at all. It was bits of torn clothing and foil food packages, the remnants of some previous hiker's ransacked supplies. Cold sweat trickled down my back as the awful implication sank in. I wasn't the first person this thing had toyed with, hunted through the darkened woods for its twisted pleasure. From the abandoned state of the cabin and the gruesome stains marring every surface, I had a grim suspicion about the fate of those other unfortunate souls. Outside, the cruel laughter came again, high and manic, then a loud thud as something heavy slammed into the door, rattling it in its frame. The flimsy lock quivered but held for now. I knew with numb certainty it was only a matter of time before the creature tired of this game and came inside to claim its prize. Galvanized by that thought, I forced my quaking legs to slide out of the sleeping bag and ease silently down to the rough plank floor. I needed to run, to flee this atavistic nightmare while I still had a chance. But the instant my feet touched the ground, a piercing howl split the night, so loud it shook dust from the ceiling beams. Clawed fingers scrabbled at the door, gouging deep into the soft wood as if it were paper. Beyond the walls, heavy bodies crashed through the underbrush, paws thrumming the earth as they circled the cabin in a relentless vortex. There was no escape that way. I was well and truly trapped until sunrise, if I survived that long. With numb fingers, I scrabbled for the bear spray at my belt and clutched it like a talisman against my chest. A pitiful defense, but it was all I had. The gun, the radio, the knife, all had vanished in the night, spirited away by my tormentor. Swallowing hard, I sank down against the mildewed mattress and shut my eyes. All I could do now was pray for dawn, even as I knew deep in my marrow that this was only the beginning of the long, harrowing night to come. Outside the door, my stalker paced and growled, its fetid breath misting against the window panes, waiting for the barriers between us to crumble like rotted wood. Waiting to taste my fear and flesh as the ancient creatures in the forest had done for generations uncounted. I must have fallen into a sort of stupor at some point during the night, a fugue state between sleeping and waking, because I jolted upright on the bunk an indeterminate time later to find pale light filtering through the cabin's single window. Dawn had come at last. The realization burst through me like a flood of icy water in the veins. Somehow, impossibly, I had survived until morning. The horrors that lurked in the darkness had not breached the flimsy barricades to drag me out into the depths of the forest. At least not yet. On rubbery legs, I stood and peered through the cracked, grimy panes. The woods beyond were wreathed in mist, the sun little more than a brassy smudge behind the shroud. Moisture dripped from sagging tree boughs, pooled on the leaf litter in murky puddles that reflected nothing of the sky. It would have almost been peaceful, an archetypal primeval scene, if not for the yawning sense of wrongness still pressing in from all sides. Steeling myself, I slid back the crude bolt lock on the door, the mechanism protesting with a rusty shriek. I winced at the noise, sure it would bring the hungry creature and its brethren crashing through the underbrush again. But the forest remained eerily silent as I eased the door open and stepped cautiously out onto the tiny porch. My boots squelched on damp, rotted wood as my eyes roved over the clearing. I half expected to see telltale claw marks gouged into the trees, sigils of the thing's nocturnal presence. But the mist and shadows obscured too much. I couldn't make out any definitive sign of the interloper. Emboldened by that realization, I risked calling out in a hoarse whisper. "Hello, is anyone there?" The words hung in the air for a breathless moment before the oppressive hush swallowed them whole. No human voice answered my plea. Just a low, mournful cry that could have been the wind sawing through the pines, or the hunting call of something far more sinister. Fear coiled tight in my gut, a cold, oily sensation. I needed to get out of here, to put as much distance as possible between myself and this accursed place. But which way to go? The trail that had led me here was lost, swallowed up by the mist and rampant foliage. In every direction, the claustrophobic press of tree trunks and grasping undergrowth hemmed me in like a prison yard. Indecision held me paralyzed on the porch for a few seconds longer than it should have. Just as I sucked in a breath, preparing to choose a vector and plunge into the woods at random, a shattering roar erupted from the tree line to my right. Birds exploded from the canopy in screeching clouds of beating wings. Then the creature came, a huge quadrupedal mass of bristling fur, wicked tusks, and glinting claws. No natural beast this, but some chimerical hybrid, a thing that existed only in ancestral nightmares and the darkest folktales. One glimpse was all my petrified brain could process before instinct kicked in and I was running, tearing blindly into the woods with the creature's baying howls dopplering behind me. Branches whipped at my face and caught at my clothes as I plunged through the undergrowth. All thoughts of direction or planning erased by a mouthful of grave soil echoed in the fetid air. Foolish manling, it slurred, ichor dribbling down its chin. You think your clumsy tools can unmake the Kushtaka? We are the forest. We are root and branch and bone, and we do not die. Despair crashed over me in a frigid wave. It had all been for nothing. The desperate flight, the grim discovery of this forsaken place, the frantic battle that had left me spent and bleeding. No hatchet hewn by human hands could slay this manifestation of primeval corruption. What chance did one battered ranger have against an atavistic force that had haunted the Alaskan wilds since before history? As if in answer, the first probing fingers of dawnlight crept through the broken window, limbing the Kushtaka's ravaged form with pale fire. It flinched from the wan radiance, a keening hiss escaping its throat as it staggered back a pace, and in that faltering retreat, I glimpsed the faintest ember of hope. Sucking in a scorching lungful of the cabin's tainted air, I surged forward, raising the dripping hatchet for one last strike. But instead of bringing it down on the creature's head, I used the blade like a lever, putting every ounce of my remaining strength into the thrust. The rusted metal caught the thing under its armpit, and I heaved with a bellow of desperate defiance. Impossibly, the Kushtaka's bulk shifted, overbalanced. With a screech of rage, it tumbled backward, directly into a shaft of early sunlight. Where the newborn rays touched its spongy flesh, wisps of greasy smoke began to rise, accompanied by a stomach-churning sizzle. No! The horror wailed, thrashing and contorting as it tried to twist away from the searing brightness. But I was unrelenting, dogging its every move, hurting it with wild swings of my makeshift weapon toward the open door. We crashed out onto the sagging porch in a flailing tangle of limbs, the Kushtaka's shriek spiraling up into an agonized crescendo. Golden light bathed the clearing now, setting the dewdrops in the grass ablaze like scattered diamonds. The monster writhed under the merciless glare, skin sloughing away in long ribbons to expose the squirming nightmare beneath. Back, I roared, punctuating the command with a savage chop of the hatchet. Back to whatever hell spawned you, beast. You'll not claim me or any other soul in this forest. Whether it understood my words or simply bowed to the searing touch of the sun, the Kushtaka broke then. With a final gurgling howl, it wrenched away and plunged into the sheltering depths of the trees, trailing streamers of charred flesh. In seconds it had vanished utterly, swallowed by the green twilight as if it had never been. I stood swaying on the leaf-strewn boards, chest heaving, scarcely able to believe that I still drew breath. The hatchet slipped from my numb fingers and thudded to the ground, already forgotten. Around me the woods lay hushed and watchful, a listening stillness that held neither menace nor welcome now. An exhausted laugh, half-sob, broke from my cracked lips as I raised my face to the brightening sky. I knew not whether I had truly vanquished the Kushtaka, or merely driven it to ground for a time, to nurse its wounds in some lightless lair until hunger drew it forth once more. It might return tomorrow, or a year hence, or long after my bones had crumbled to dust beneath the uncaring trees. But here, now, I had survived. I had stood against the nightmare and reclaimed some small measure of the world for those who walked in the sun. And that victory, however fleeting, was enough. Wearily, I set my back to the cabin and its grim secrets and began limping toward the distant promise of the rising sun. It would be a long journey back to the lands I once knew, and I bore wounds both of body and soul that might never fully heal. But I would go forward nonetheless, one step at a time, until I left the last of these haunted woods behind me. For I was the ranger, and that was both my burden and my pride. To walk the wild places, to stand watch against the horrors that lurked in the shadows of the world. And no matter what nightmares the future held, I knew I would never yield that sacred trust. The forest could keep its secrets, but it would not have me. The morning fog hung heavy over the dense Alaskan forest as I hoisted my pack and stepped onto the narrow trail. As a seasoned park ranger, I was no stranger to solo treks into the vast wilderness. But this time felt different. The air itself seemed to pulse with a strange energy, and the usual chatter of birds and wildlife was eerily absent. I shook off the unsettling feeling, chalking it up to the isolation that came with the territory out here. Still, I couldn't shake the prickling sensation on the back of my neck, as if unseen eyes were tracking my every move. I consulted my map and compass, double-checking my planned route. A group of hikers had gone missing in this area a week ago, and it was my job to survey the backcountry for any signs of them. As I moved deeper into the shadowy timberline, the towering evergreens seemed to close in around me, their gnarled branches reaching out like desperate fingers. The silence was deafening, broken only by the crunch of my boots against the pine needle carpet and my own labored breathing. I quickened my pace, eager to cover as much ground as possible before nightfall. But with each step, the feeling of being watched only intensified. By midday, I stumbled upon a scene that made my blood run cold. An abandoned campsite with a tent shredded to ribbons. Supplies were strewn about haphazardly, as if the occupants had fled in a panic. I crouched down to examine a discarded hiking boot, the first solid clue in the disappearances. The leather was badly scarred, as if by the claws of an impossibly large animal. As I rose, a sudden snap of a branch from the forest beyond made me whirl around, pulse pounding. But there was nothing there. Just the endless expanse of wilderness and the sinking feeling that I was no longer alone out here. I suddenly felt very small and vulnerable amidst the towering trees. Taking a deep breath, I shouldered my pack and pressed on, even as the shadows around me seemed to deepen and writhe. If I wanted answers, I would have to venture even farther into the untamed heart of the forest. But I couldn't shake the growing certainty that I was walking into something far more dangerous than I could possibly imagine. The unnatural silence dogged my steps as I pushed deeper into the backcountry, following the scant trail left by the vanished hikers. The afternoon sun struggled to pierce the dense canopy overhead, casting everything in an unsettling twilight gloom. Pausing to consult my map once more, my eye was drawn to a small X marked in pencil, accompanied by the words "Skinwalker Territory, Do Not Enter," scrawled in a shaky hand. A chill ran up my spine. In all my years patrolling these woods, I'd never seen such a warning before. Suddenly, a low growl from the undergrowth made me freeze in my tracks. Heart hammering, I slowly turned to see a pair of gleaming eyes staring back at me from the shadows. But as quickly as they appeared, they vanished into the foliage. Unnerved, I knelt down to examine the soft earth of the trail. There, imprinted clearly in the damp soil, was a set of tracks unlike anything I'd ever seen. Too large to be a wolf or bear, with long, razor-sharp claws, and bizarrely, the imprint seemed to shift before my eyes, blurring and changing shape. A twig snapped behind me and I spun around, reaching instinctively for my sidearm. An old man emerged from the trees, his weathered face creased with concern. "You shouldn't be out here alone," he said gravely, his eyes darting nervously to the lengthening shadows. "There's something in these woods. Something that ain't natural." I eyed him warily, unsure whether to trust this stranger who'd appeared out of nowhere. "I'm a ranger. It's my job to find those missing hikers. Do you know what happened to them?" The old-timer shook his head sadly. "They ventured where they shouldn't have. Into the territory of the skinwalker." "The skinwalker?" I repeated skeptically, recalling the cryptic warning on my map. "What are you talking about?" "An ancient creature. A shapeshifter. It can take the form of any beast or any man." His voice dropped to a haunted whisper. "And it hunts those who trespass in its domain." With that chilling pronouncement, the old man turned and melted back into the trees, leaving me reeling. I wanted to dismiss his words as the superstitious ramblings of a backwoods hermit, but the eerie shifting tracks at my feet and the prickling sensation of being stalked told a different story. Stealing my nerves, I forged ahead, even as the unseen presence tracking me seemed to grow closer with every step. The shadows took on a sinister cast. Every rustle of leaves sounded like the footfalls of something unimaginable. I couldn't shake the uncanny feeling that the very wilderness around me was somehow alive and malevolent. Without warning, a blood-curdling scream pierced the air, sending a shock of pure terror racing through my veins. I broke into a run, crashing blindly through the underbrush towards the source of the awful sound. But when I burst into a small clearing, I saw only the swaying boughs of the trees and a few crows, their raucous cries echoing cruelly in the silence. As I stood there gasping, a flicker of movement caught my eye. Something was moving through the trees, darting from trunk to trunk with a rapidity that was far from natural, something that walked like a man but twisted and prowled like an animal. Then, for a single blood-freezing instant, I swore I glimpsed a face through the leaves. Not a human face, but a monstrous visage that flickered and changed even as I stared in disbelief. The nightmarish, shifting face of the skinwalker itself. In that moment, I knew with grim certainty that the old man's dire warnings had been all too true, and I was now being hunted through this lonely wilderness by an entity that defied all the natural laws of the world. The lowering sun painted the sky in lurid shades of orange and crimson as I staggered onward through the darkening woods, my breath coming in ragged gasps. With every step, the trail I'd been following seemed to grow fainter, the trees pressing ever closer on all sides. It wasn't just the failing light disorienting me. It felt as though the very landscape itself was shifting around me, leading me in circles. I'd long ago stopped checking my compass. The spinning needle offered no clarity in this place where the rational rules of nature held no sway. The sane part of my mind still stubbornly refused to accept the reality of my predicament. There had to be some logical explanation, some way to navigate out of this nightmare and back to the world I knew. But it was growing harder to cling to that conviction with each passing minute. Not when the eerie cries that shattered the twilight were growing louder. Closer, they started as animal sounds. The baying of wolves, the screech of a mountain lion. Then with a skin-crawling horror I realized they were unmistakably blending into the voices of men. The agonized voices of those doomed hikers I'd been tracking. "Help me. Please God, somebody help me." The desperate screams seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, filling the air with a chorus of unearthly torment. Amidst the hellish cacophony, I could have sworn I heard my own name being shrieked over and over, each cry more distorted than the last. Pure self-preservation kept me from responding. I'd already seen the lengths to which this creature would go to lure in its prey, for I had no more doubts that I was being stalked by something that could wear any face, mimic any voice. The skinwalker was toying with me through the encroaching darkness, savoring my growing panic. As night fell like a suffocating shroud, I stumbled into a small clearing and the decision was abruptly made for me. I could go no farther. Despite every instinct screaming against it, I would have to make my stand here until daybreak. With shaking hands, I set up my meager camp, jumping at every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves in the forest beyond the feeble glow of my fire. As I unrolled my sleeping bag, a glint of metal caught my eye. A damaged compass, not unlike my own, lay half buried in the dirt. Beside it, the shredded remains of a backpack, its contents scattered as if a cyclone had ripped through. A leaden weight settled in my gut as I examined the abandoned belongings, each discovery a mute testimony to unknown horrors. A torn and blood-stained jacket, an upturned hiking boot, an old Polaroid camera, its cracked lens winking dully in the firelight. Almost against my will, I picked up the camera and clicked the shutter open. The first photo was innocuous enough. A group of unsuspecting hikers gathered around a campfire just like my own. Smiling faces that had no idea of the nightmare lying in wait. But the next picture froze the blood in my veins. The same scene now thrown into chaos, tents crumpled, supplies strewn madly about. And in the blurry background of the frame, the silhouette of something huge and misshapen lunging for the fleeing figures. The last photo was so blurred and distorted it was almost indecipherable. Almost, but not so much that I couldn't make out a grotesquely contorted face looming out of the darkness. A face that seemed to flicker and morph even in the split second captured by the camera flash. An impossible hybrid of man and monster. The photos fell from my numb fingers as a terrible realization crashed over me. This was no random string of hiker disappearances. This creature, this skinwalker, had been hunting here in a calculatedly malicious pattern for months, possibly years. Staring into the fire's hypnotic dance, my mind raced, trying to recall every scrap of native lore I'd ever heard about the mythical being. that even now circled my fragile oasis of light in the vast, unfathomable dark. Other legends crowded in. Ghouls, demons, creatures that wore human skins as easily as any other. And for the first time, they no longer felt like the stuff of fantasy to me. Not here in the domain of the skinwalker. Sleep was a hopeless prospect. I huddled by the waning campfire, eyes straining to pierce the clinging blackness. All night the screams rose and fell. A macabre aria that never drew closer but never truly faded. Those tormented cries twined with other noises. The monstrous growls of predatory animals, weeping, crazed, broken laughter. The skinwalker was out there, gliding silently between the trees, playing its twisted mind games, taunting me with the voices of the taken, and the relentless promise that before this night was over, it would claim another victim. As the long, harrowing night wore on, the darkness beyond my fire seemed to thicken and congeal, becoming an almost tangible presence. The flickering flames cast crawling, distorted shadows on the surrounding tree trunks, creating a shifting labyrinth of light and gloom that made it impossible to tell substance from illusion. My nerves were rubbed raw from the incessant screams and phantom noises, every muscle wound tight as a bowstring as I fought the overwhelming urge to bolt into the pitch-black woods. Every crackle of the campfire jolted through me like an electric shock. Every whisper of the night breeze in the branches overhead sounded like a hushed, conspiratorial voice. It was growing harder by the minute to convince myself that the lurking silhouettes at the edges of the clearing were just a product of my overtaxed imagination. That the glowing eyes that winked in and out of existence between the distant trunks weren't drawing inexorably closer. Against all reason, I found myself straining to make out words in the animalistic growls and otherworldly wails that rose and fell like a deranged chorus. Were those just the shrieks of predators on the prowl? Or was there something more hideously articulate in those sounds? Threats, taunts, snatches of some blasphemous tongue the human mind was never meant to comprehend? Unable to bear sitting still a moment longer, I lurched to my feet and began pacing restlessly around the perimeter of the clearing. Anything to distract myself from the relentless pressure of the night terrors, and the leaden certainty of the fate that awaited me if I let my guard down for an instant. Was then I discovered the first signs that my camp had been breached. The shredded remnants of my food supplies littered the ground, savagely torn packs disgorging their contents onto the dirt. Crackers crushed to powder, cans punctured and leaking like drained corpses. Even the rock-hard trail rations had been ripped to shreds by cruelly powerful claws. But that was not the worst. When I knelt to examine the ruins of my pack, I touched something warm, wet. A hideous coppery smell filled my nostrils, and bile surged into my throat as my headlamp illuminated smears of crimson. Already blackening stains splashed across the silver fabric. I recoiled in horror, casting the light wildly about in search of some wounded creature, some rational source for the sickening sight. But the bloodstains continued in a ghastly trail leading directly to the torn mouth of my tent, the same tent that had been securely zipped shut when I'd made my grim discovery only moments before. Every fiber of my being wanted to bolt from this unholy place, but I couldn't abandon the search for the missing hikers, not even with the near certainty that they had already met an unspeakable end. Steeling myself, I reached for my sidearm with trembling hands and advanced on the tent, dreading what gruesome sight would greet me. But when I ripped back the bloody folds of nylon, there was nothing, just my empty sleeping bag now shiny with gore, and a silence so absolute it was like a physical force crushing the breath from my lungs. Then, directly behind me came a noise that froze me in place as if I'd been shot, a soft, rasping breath expelled in a sigh that could only have come from human lips, and when a guttural voice spoke, it was with the unmistakable cadence of my own. "Found you." I whirled around, pulse hammering so hard I could scarcely hear over the throb of blood in my ears. But the voice, my voice, had fallen silent. The night-shrouded clearing was empty. Only the slow, mournful creak of branches in the wind and a silence heavy with malice. For a moment I wondered if sleep deprivation and raw panic had eroded the last of my sanity. If the voice had been nothing but a projection of my own spiraling fears, but I couldn't deny the crawling conviction that I'd just heard the skinwalker speak, that it was done taunting and the true hunt was finally on. That certainty galvanized me into motion. I snatched up my pack, no longer caring about salvaging supplies. There was only one imperative now, to flee this accursed clearing before I faced the same horrifying fate as those I'd been tracking. I plunged into the forest at a dead run, heedless of direction, rationality drowned beneath a blind animal panic. Underbrush tore at my legs, unseen branches whipped my face, but I didn't slow. Bodiless screams pursued me. The same terrible cries of human anguish I'd been hearing all night. Only now they mirrored my own ragged gasps as I crashed through the pitch-dark woods. Was I even truly running, or just thrashing uselessly against the same few yards of foliage? The forest around me was an undifferentiated mass of shadow and menace, the towering trunk seeming to twist and writhe in my flashlight's frantic beam. The ground itself felt unstable, treacherous, as if it were just waiting for me to tire so it could pull me down into some abyssal maw. Behind me, I could hear a relentless drumming, like the footfalls of an enormous predator. It pursued me with a merciless, implacable tread, not bothering to disguise its approach. Somehow I knew it was the skinwalker, and it had assumed its true primal form to run me to ground. Sobbing, I redoubled my efforts, hurling myself forward with the last of my ebbing strength. But the crashing, loping pursuit only grew louder, closer. I could feel the skinwalker's rancid breath on the back of my neck, the heat of its gaze burning into my spine. Then my toe caught on a gnarled root, and I went sprawling, rolling down a steep embankment in a tangle of limbs and flying leaves. I fetched up against the trunk of a massive spruce, the impact driving the last of the air from my lungs. For a terrible instant, I simply lay there, dazed and gasping. The fall had torn my pack away, and my flashlight lay yards away, its feeble glow illuminating nothing but the featureless wall of undergrowth. Above me, the relentless footfalls reached the lip of the ravine and ground to a halt. A guttural, snarling breath sounded from the darkness. Then a shape emerged from the dense foliage, moving with a slow, predatory gait. In the guttering light, I caught impressions of a hulking frame, a grotesque hybrid of human and animal, shaggy fur and claws that gleamed like scalpels. But it was the eyes that riveted me, cold, intelligent eyes that held no trace of humanity. The skinwalker crouched at the edge of the embankment, its baleful gaze pinning me like an insect. I fumbled for my gun, knowing it would be less than useless against this primal nightmare. But before I could draw, the creature opened its jaws in a chilling parody of a smile. Before my disbelieving eyes, the skinwalker began to change. Flesh rippled and flowed like molten wax, fur sloughing away. Bones cracked and popped sickeningly as they elongated and reshaped themselves. And then the thing that wore a human skin rose to stand on two legs, looming over me. It had taken on the aspect of one of the missing hikers, a man I'd only seen in photographs. But there was nothing human in that slack, leering face, in those glassy, soulless eyes that stared down at me with a feral hunger. "Time to stop running, little rabbit," it rasped, in a grotesque approximation of the hiker's voice. "You're the last of the prey, the only one left to play with." I scrabbled backwards in the dirt, my heels catching on exposed roots. The skinwalker glided down the slope with almost leisurely malevolence, a twisted fusion of man and monster. Those cold, dead eyes locked with mine, and in them I saw the promise of an agony beyond imagining. It intended to savor my terror, draw out my end with hideous creativity. But before the creature could lunge for me, a sudden burst of blinding light erupted from the trees to my right. The skinwalker recoiled with a shriek of rage, shielding its eyes. I caught a glimpse of human figures charging into the ravine, flashlights and flaming branches held high. I recognized the grizzled face of the old man I'd met on the trail, his weathered features set in grim determination. At his side were others I didn't know, men and women, some barely more than teenagers. They spread out in a half circle, thrusting their makeshift torches at the skinwalker to keep it at bay. "Get back," the old man shouted to me, never taking his eyes off the snarling creature. "We'll hold it off, but you've got to run, now!" Operating on pure survival instinct, I lurched to my feet and plunged into the undergrowth behind the confrontation. Even as I fled, I heard the sounds of a brutal struggle break out in my wake, screams of pain and fury, the crack of gunshots, a deep, bellowing roar that seemed to shake the earth itself. I ran until my heart felt like it would burst, until the noises of battle had long faded into the night. At last, on the brink of collapse, I burst from the tree line onto a narrow dirt road. An old Forest Service pickup idled there, a haggard-looking man with a ranger's badge hunched over the wheel. "Thank God," he breathed when he saw me. "When you didn't check in, I thought..." He trailed off, shaking his head. "Doesn't matter. Let's get you out of here." I practically fell into the passenger seat, not arguing as we bounced off down the road. My mind was a whirl of confusion and horror, unable to fully process the impossible events of the long night. I had so many questions and only one certainty, that I could never unsee the nightmares I'd witnessed, that they would haunt me for the rest of my days. As the truck rumbled on through the darkness, leaving the accursed forest farther behind with every mile, I slumped against the window and let the sheer exhaustion take me at last. But even as I spiraled down into sleep, I couldn't banish the lurking unease, the terrible conviction that my own personal hell was far from over. And deep in the trackless wilderness, beneath a pitiless sky, something ancient and evil raised its head to sniff the wind, seeking the scent of a hunt unfinished, of a lone prey that had escaped into the wider world beyond. Chapter 6. The cabin dawn found me jolting awake as the pickup bounced and clattered up a winding dirt track, pale light filtering through the bug-spattered windshield. For a few precious seconds I was blessedly disoriented. The events of the preceding night blurred to the indistinct shreds of a nightmare. Then memory crashed over me in a sickening wave, and I jackknifed upright with a gasp. The ranger driving shot me a look of mingled sympathy and apprehension, but said nothing. "Where are we going?" I managed, wincing at the raw scrape of my voice. Every part of me ached like I'd been wrung through a mangle, muscles quivering with exhausted aftershocks. "Someplace safe, or as safe as anywhere can be now." His jaw clenched as he stared out at the rough track winding ahead. "The old Matheson homestead. It's been abandoned for decades, but it's defensible and warded. Under any other circumstances I might have scoffed at that, demanded a rational explanation. But in the pitiless light of day, with the undeniable reality of the horrors I'd witnessed still echoing in my head, I was long past skepticism. The cabin turned out to be a ramshackle two-story affair of weathered timber and mossy shingles, hunkered in a clearing ringed by towering primordial evergreens. A sagging porch wrapped around the structure, and every window was boarded over. Odd symbols daubed across the rotting wood in rust-brown stain. My dubiously helpful companion didn't even kill the engine, just nodded to the back of the truck. "There's supplies in there to hold you. You should be secure here until we can regroup." "Regroup for what? Who even are you people?" I demanded. But he just shook his head grimly. "No time. It's still out there, and it'll be coming. For you, for all of us who stood against it. Nowhere is safe forever, but this'll have to do." He reached over to unceremoniously shove open my door. "Now go. Bar the door, and no matter what you hear, don't come out until someone comes for you." I half fell out of the cab, scarcely having time to snatch a duffel bag from the flatbed, before the truck was roaring off in a spray of gravel and pine needles. And then I was alone, facing the desolate homestead squatting in its lonely clearing like something out of a macabre fairy tale. There was nothing for it but to take the stranger's advice. Shouldering the bag, I trudged up the sagging steps and shoved through the unlocked front door. The interior was draped in shadows and stale air, furnished with nothing but a few pieces of decrepit furniture haphazardly shoved to the walls. Every surface was thick with undisturbed dust. No, not undisturbed. In the wan shafts of light spearing through gaps in the boarded windows, I saw the dust had been disturbed in places, swept aside by questing fingers to bare the scarred floorboards beneath. As my eyes adjusted to the gloom, other details leapt out with increasing dread. Odd bundles of twigs and bones dangled from the rafters, clacking gently in some unfelt draft. Symbols had been gouged into the door frames, the window sills, the very walls, the same unsettling designs I'd seen painted on the exterior. Crossing to the cold hearth, I found a curious collection of objects on the mantel. An ancient, faded photograph in a tarnished silver frame, a twist of cloth stiff with old bloodstains, a crudely carved wooden fetish that made my skin crawl to look at it. But it was the journal that drew my eye. It lay in the midst of the strange talismans, its cracked leather cover flaking away to reveal the yellowing pages within. Hands shaking, I reached for it, some compulsion beyond my control urging me to uncover its secrets. The first pages were inscribed in a cramped, spidery hand, the faded ink still legible despite the age of the entries. As I scanned the lines, a tale of creeping horror began to unfold, the unknown writer's growing panic and desperation palpable in every increasingly erratic word. He spoke of an evil that had long stalked the deep woods, a deathless abomination spawned from a corruption far older than the forest itself, a being of insatiable malice that had haunted and hunted the land's first peoples. its grim legend whispered around campfires for generations. The Skinwalker. The journal told of the creature's savage attacks, the grisly trophies it claimed from those hapless enough to cross its path, and of the desperate measures the region's native tribes had taken to hold it at bay. The wards and charms of precious silver they'd learned could repel its profane touch. But as I read on with growing nausea, I uncovered hints of something more. The writer's tone grew feverish with maniacal conviction as he expounded on his theory of the Skinwalker's true nature. No mere beast, no matter how cunning or cruel. No, he believed this abomination was first and foremost a corrupter, a poisoner of souls. That the greatest horror was not the gory ruin of the flesh it inflicted, but the spiritual desolation it left in its wake, the minds and hearts it desecrated by its very presence. And now I, who had witnessed that same savagery, who had stared into those soulless, glassy eyes and felt the abyss staring back, could not dispute his words. The Skinwalker left scars far deeper than the merely physical, the kind of wounds that could never truly heal. As I closed the journal with shaking hands, I knew with leaden certainty that simply surviving the night's events would never be enough. That even if I made it back to the relative safety of civilization, a part of me would always be trapped in those shadow-choked woods, forever held in thrall by the memory of the evil I'd faced, and the terrible, lurking knowledge that it was still out there. As if summoned by my darkening thoughts, a shrill, agonized wail pierced the morning calm from somewhere beyond the clearing, and beneath that awful sound a guttural baying rose in counterpoint, the undulating howls of something that could never have issued from the throat of any earthly beast. With fumbling fingers I reached for my gun, my last pitifully inadequate defense against the malice that even now closed in to claim me, and in that moment I knew beyond all doubt that here, in this desolate place steeped in the aura of old and unspeakable horrors, I would make my final stand, alone against a nightmare from the primordial dark. The hunt never ended, only the players changed, and this time, there would be no escape for the prey. The chilling cries grew closer, the discordant chorus of agonized human wails and guttural, bestial snarls setting my teeth on edge. Gun clutched in one white-knuckled hand, I shoved the moldering table against the door, knowing even as I did so the futility of the gesture. The thing that hunted me would hardly be deterred by a mere physical barrier. Reeling, I cast about the room in search of some escape, some way to cheat the fate that closed in with each passing second. But the cabin proved as much of a prison as a refuge, every window and door warded and barricaded. Even the narrow stairs to the upper story had been roughly boarded over, sealing me into this dank, shadowy crypt. Then, with a suddenness that froze the blood in my veins, the howls cut off. The ensuing silence was somehow worse, heavy with malevolent anticipation. I could feel the Skinwalker's presence like a physical pressure, an oppressive weight bearing down on the cabin from all sides. "I know you're in there, little rabbit." The voice that shattered the quiet was a grotesque parody of human speech, grating and guttural. Hearing it from so close sent a fresh bolt of panic spiking through me. "Did you think you could hide from me? Thought your pitiful wards and totems could keep you safe?" A rasping chuckle, thick with cruel amusement. "I am older than your feeble symbols, stronger than your craven prayers. You only delay the inevitable." I was backed against the far wall now, my whole body trembling in helpless terror as the voice came again, now thunderously loud, as if the speaker stood just outside the door. "Your friends thought they could challenge me, thought their guns and their torches could drive me back." A wet smacking sound like a predator licking its chops. "They burned so very brightly for a time, but the light always fades, and the darkness is patient." Through the slats nailed across the windows I glimpsed a shadow moving, a hulking silhouette blotting out the gray morning light. The Skinwalker was circling the cabin in a lazy, tightening spiral, savoring my powerless dread. Their screams were sweet. It crooned obscenely, "But not as sweet as yours will be. I've saved you for last, little rabbit. My special prize." A thud against the door like a heavy weight deliberately striking the flimsy wood. Then another. The timbers groaned in their frame as the measured blows increased in tempo, in force. The Skinwalker was toying with me, drawing out my despair. It could have smashed through the feeble barricade in an instant, but it wanted me to suffer the endless moments of anticipation first, to marinate in my own helplessness and fear. Seized by a kind of madness born of abject panic, I raised my gun and began to fire blindly at the door. The roar of the shots in the enclosed space was deafening, acrid cordite stinging my nostrils. But I kept pulling the trigger even after the hammer clicked on an empty chamber, the small rational part of my brain screaming the utter futility of the action. The pounding stopped. For a moment I stared at the perforated door, hardly daring to breathe. Had the bullets actually found their mark? Had I somehow managed to wound the monster, if not kill it? Then a splintering crack split the air as a gnarled, hideously taloned hand punched through the weakened wood. Before my disbelieving eyes, the hand began to change. Flesh rippling and bones writhing beneath the skin, fingers elongated into cruel razor-tipped claws, joints popping and shifting with gruesome liquid sounds. Another hand smashed through beside the first, then a third. The cabin walls shuddered as inhuman strength ripped the door from its very hinges, the timbers that had barred it snapping like matchsticks. And the skinwalker, the entity that had stalked me through this long, nightmarish odyssey, was finally revealed in all its horrific glory. It was as if every childhood terror, every primal fear dredged up from the ancestral memory of the species, had been given obscene flesh. The creature loomed in the shattered doorway, its frame a hulking fusion of man and animal and some blasphemous thing that was neither. Matted, stinking fur sprouted from pallid, pustulant skin stretched over misshapen bones and bulging, inhuman musculature, but it was the eyes that pierced me to my very core. Cold, pitiless eyes that glittered with a malevolent awareness far beyond the merely bestial, eyes that promised an infinity of torments and reveled in the knowledge of the spiritual desolation they wrought. "You thought to defy me?" it snarled, its lipless maw gaping to reveal row upon row of needle fangs. "Thought your faith, your purity of spirit could shield you?" The skinwalker crouched, its ravaged frame poised to spring, to rend and tear, to finally claim the prey it had run to ground. "You are already corrupted, already marked as mine. Your light is guttering, little rabbit, and I have all of forever to pick my teeth with your bones." And as the monstrosity lunged, as those dripping claws closed around my throat and the jaws that were a horror of wolf and man, and something far older and more terrible than either yawned wide to engulf me, I threw back my head and screamed as I had never screamed before, all my terror and despair and defiance pouring out in a single endless howl. Screamed as those hideous teeth pierced my flesh and the fetid breath of the beast filled my nostrils. Screamed until my voice gave out and darkness closed in and I knew nothing more. Consciousness returned slowly, in fragments. The first thing I became aware of was the pain, a deep throbbing ache that suffused every inch of my battered body, then the cold, the damp chill of bare earth seeping into my bones. Groggily, I opened my eyes, squinting against the watery light filtering through a dense tangle of branches. I was lying in a shallow depression between the gnarled roots of an enormous tree, its trunk lost in the green gloom overhead. Gingerly, I pushed myself upright, hissing as the motion sent fresh waves of agony lancing through me. My clothes hung in tattered rags, the exposed skin beneath crisscrossed with ugly gashes and mottled with purpling bruises. The flesh of my throat was raw and tender, and when I raised a trembling hand to the wound, my fingers came away sticky with half-dried blood. Memory crashed over me then, a deluge of horror that drove the breath from my lungs. The cabin, the skinwalker, that final, terrible confrontation. By all rights, I should be dead or worse. So why was I still breathing, still aware and sane if not whole? Clawing my way to my feet, I staggered through the trees, following the faint lightning in the vegetation that hinted at a break in the forest ahead. I half expected at any moment to hear the skinwalker's guttural snarl behind me, to feel those cruel claws sink into my shoulder and drag me back into a waking nightmare without end. But the woods were eerily silent, holding their collective breath. No bird calls, no chattering of small animals in the underbrush, as if every living creature had fled, leaving me alone in a sepulchral hush. By the time I broke through the last screen of foliage and stumbled out onto the verge of a disused logging track, my whole body was shaking with exhaustion and the aftershocks of adrenaline. In the distance, I could hear the faint growl of an engine, a sound so mundane, so blessedly normal that it brought stinging tears to my abraded eyes. Waving my arms in desperate semaphore, I lurched down the track towards the approaching vehicle. It was an ancient pickup, its green Forest Service livery almost obscured by rust and peeling paint. The truck rattled to a halt and a figure stepped out, a wiry, weathered man in a ranger's uniform, his face creased with mingled surprise and concern. "Jesus, Mary and Joseph," he blasphemed softly as he took in my ragged appearance. "What the hell happened to you, son?" I opened my mouth to answer, but the words wouldn't come. How could I possibly explain the unimaginable horrors I had witnessed? Horrors that would haunt my dreams for the rest of my life. The wounds on my body would heal, but the scars on my psyche went far deeper. I got lost. I managed finally, my voice rusty from strain. There was an animal. It attacked me. I don't remember anything else. It was a feeble story, and I could tell by the ranger's skeptical frown that he wasn't convinced. But in the end, he didn't press for details. Just helped me into the passenger seat with a gentleness that brought a lump to my throat. As we bounced off down the old logging road, leaving the forest and its nightmares behind, I slumped against the door and let the engine's vibration lull me into an exhausted doze. It was dark when I jerked awake again, disoriented and alarmed by the unfamiliar confines of the truck's cab, but it was just the dimness of late evening. The sky outside tinted an eerie green by the last light filtering through the trees. The ranger had stopped at a fork in the road and was peering up one of the branching tracks with a peculiar expression. "Funny," he muttered, almost to himself. "I could have sworn old Matheson's place was up that way. But I must be getting senile. It's been 20 years since anyone's lived out this far." My heart skipped a beat and I craned my neck to follow his gaze. There, nearly lost in the gathering shadows, I glimpsed the sagging roof and crumbling chimney of a derelict cabin. The same cabin where I had faced the skinwalker and miraculously, inexplicably survived. A sudden certainty gripped me then, colder and more implacable than the dark. I hadn't escaped. Not really. A part of me was still back there, trapped in that dank, shadow-choked room, forever at the mercy of the ageless evil that lurked in the ancient deeps of the forest. The skinwalker's words echoed in my mind, laden with dreadful promise. "You are already corrupted, already marked as mine." And I knew, with a desolate finality, that it was true, that no matter how far I ran, no matter how hard I fought, I would never truly be free. As the truck rumbled off into the thickening night, I closed my eyes and let the darkness take me, the darkness without and the darkness within. Ahead lay only a lifetime of running, of glancing over my shoulder and starting at every creak of a floorboard or rustle of leaves in the dark. The prey would have no peace in this world or the next, but for now there was oblivion and I welcomed it. For in oblivion, at least, I didn't have to remember, didn't have to relive the feel of undying flesh beneath my fingers, or the glassy-eyed malice of a gaze that peered through the veil of humanity to the cowering animal beneath. In oblivion, if only for a little while, I could forget that I had gazed into the abyss, and I could numb myself to the sickening, inescapable awareness of the abyss gazing back, patient and avid and so very, very hungry. The Cessna's propeller sputtered to a stop as the float plane settled onto the glassy surface of the remote lake. I hopped out onto the pontoon, grabbed my pack from the cargo compartment, and waved to Jake, the grizzled bush pilot, as he throttled up and took off, leaving me profoundly alone in the vast Alaskan backcountry. As a ranger for the Tongass National Forest, I was used to solo treks into isolated areas to clear trails, scout campsites, and generally keep an eye on things, but this assignment was different. For the past month, there had been reports of missing hikers in the vicinity of Kushtaka Mountain. Search parties had found no trace of them. The higher-ups wanted boots on the ground for a thorough sweep of the area before the short summer season ended. And I had drawn the short straw. Checking my map and compass, I shouldered my heavy pack and headed into the dense, temperate rainforest of spruce and hemlock that soared hundreds of feet overhead. The lichen-draped giants blocked out the pale sunlight, immersing me in a cathedral-like gloom. The spongy forest floor muffled my footsteps. An eerie hush enveloped me, the normal chatter and buzz of wildlife eerily absent. An involuntary shiver ran down my spine, and the hairs on my neck prickled. I felt watched, unseen eyes tracking my every movement. I tried to shake it off, chalking it up to the isolation and nerves. But as I continued on, the uncanny feeling of being stalked only intensified, subtle signs that something was off about this ancient forest, a wrongness that filled me with a growing sense of dread. I kept hiking deeper into the shadowy timberland, following a faint trail along the frothy gray glacial river that drained the lake. Tangled thickets of devil's club and blueberry bushes grasped at my legs. A ghostly fog crept in, tendrils of vapor twisting between the colossal tree trunks. My skin crawled with the unshakable sensation that I was no longer alone out here, that something old and dark had awoken in this primordial corner of the world. something that should have remained asleep. The mist thickened into a steady drizzle as I trekked onward, cold rivulets trickling down my neck. The gloom deepened to a sepulchral twilight. I paused under a massive, gnarled yellow cedar to consult my topo map, trying to get my bearings in this increasingly disorienting murk. That's when I spotted them. Tracks in the soft loam nearby, startlingly clear and distinct. I crouched down for a closer look, my scalp prickling with unease. These were like no animal prints I had ever seen before, roughly the size and shape of a wolf's paw, but with strangely elongated digits that ended in curved, talon-like marks. Not quite human, not quite beast. An unsettling amalgamation that made no biological sense. I followed the eerie trail with my eyes as it wove between the immense trees, sometimes on 4 feet, sometimes bizarrely shifting to 2, then to 4 again. As if whatever made them occasionally stood up to walk on its hind legs. A chill rippled through me at the thought. I unholstered my bear spray, my thumb resting on the safety trigger. Without warning, a voice rang out in the gloom, making me jump. "You'd best turn back now, Ranger, before it's too late." An old man emerged from the screening mist, leaning heavily on a carved walking stick. He was native, a Tlingit elder by his dress and deeply lined face. His dark eyes gleamed with a look of grim warning. "Plenty of black bear and grizz in these parts," I said, covering my unease. "I know how to handle myself in the bush." The old Tlingit slowly shook his head. "Not those tracks. Not a bear." He nodded at the cast I had been examining. "That's the Kushtaka, ancient evil spirit of these woods, shapeshifter. Takes many forms to hunt, to deceive. You're in its territory now." An icy ripple ran down my back at his words, at the dead certainty in his voice. He was a local, no doubt steeped in the stories and superstitions of his people about this remote wilderness. But this didn't feel like a myth or legend. Those uncanny tracks were real. "Have you seen it? Know where it dens?" I asked, probing for any information that might help me find the missing hikers, and avoid becoming one of them myself. The old man glanced around furtively and backed away, as if suddenly fearful of being overheard, of being watched by unseen eyes. "Turn back," he repeated under his breath. "While you still can." With that, he melted back into the mist, vanishing like an apparition, leaving me alone again in the eerie, watching forest. A distant, chilling sound drifted through the fog-shrouded trees, the hollow cry of a loon, but distorted, almost human-like. The mimicry of the Kushtaka, if the tribal elder was to be believed. Sweat began to gather under my collar despite the dank chill. What was I up against out here? Taking a deep breath, I continued forward, following the ghostly, not quite wolf tracks as they wound deeper into the shadowy timberland, into the heart of the Kushtaka's domain. Dusk was fast approaching, and I didn't relish the idea of being caught out here after nightfall. The sickly gray daylight was fading rapidly as I pushed through the dense undergrowth, sword ferns up to my shoulders. The strange tracks continued on, growing more erratic, sometimes even seeming to scale sheer tree trunks before dropping back to the ground. I checked my watch, alarmed at how quickly night was falling. It was too late to hike back out to the lakeshore and set up camp before full dark. I'd have to stop here, make a fire, try to survive the night, and pray the thing that made these impossible tracks didn't find me. With the uncanny growing feeling of being stalked, my senses stretched wire-taut. I scouted around for a defendable place to bed down against the looming threat. That's when I found the torn pack. It was wedged under a deadfall, easy to miss unless you were on top of it. Hairs rising on my neck, I dragged it out. It was a standard backpack like mine, but slashed to ribbons, the contents strewn about. Food and gear scattered everywhere, supplies to last for days in the backcountry. But no sign of the owner. No tracks. An icy dread gripped my heart as I realized this belonged to one of the missing hikers, and that something had ripped it, and likely them, apart. The kills of an animal predator like a grizz should have been easy to identify, but this was no bear. The implications of what could have done this chilled my blood. I frantically scanned the encroaching shadows between the giant hemlocks, the creeping tendrils of mist, searching for any sign of the hiker, or the thing that had taken them. A snapping twig made me whirl around, unholstering my bear spray with a hammering heart, but the forest was still, silent, watching. The feeling of eyes upon me was overwhelming now, an almost physical sensation prickling the back of my neck. I hastily gathered up the shredded pack and remains of the hiker's gear, shoving what I could into my own rucksack. It might hold clues to their fate. If I lived to study it further. With the light almost gone, I had no choice but to make camp for the night here. I collected dry branches and set about building a fire, my hands shaking, as if the flames could ward off the ancient unseen terror lurking in the trees. I laid out my sleeping bag and tried to cook a quick meal on the small campfire, but my appetite was gone, my stomach in knots. Every rustle of leaves in the twilight made me flinch and stare wildly into the gloom. The normal chatter of birds settling in for the night was eerily absent. The forest felt smothered in an unnatural hush. Then the chilling sounds began. Shrieks and howls in the distance that could have been a wolf pack. But the cries were horribly off, warped and distorted, mingled with what sounded like terrified, very human screams, echoing through the mist, through my soul. The cacophony rose to an awful crescendo, and then cut off abruptly, leaving me in the suffocating silence again. I huddled by the guttering fire, my bear spray clutched in my white-knuckled fist. I added more wood with trembling hands, building the flames as high as I dared. It was small comfort against the primordial horror I could feel stalking me, circling me out there in the haunted night. I didn't dare try to sleep, every nerve stretched raw with terror. Something was coming for me in the dark. Something ancient and evil, and I was utterly alone and unprepared to face it. I crouched rigidly by the campfire, a cold sweat filming my skin despite the flickering heat. My eyes frantically scanned the wall of darkness and shifting fog just beyond the wavering circle of firelight.
Staring into the abyss,
straining to catch any sign of movement, any glimpse of the thing I could feel watching me from the dank shadows. The night dragged on interminably, my spine crawling with dread, every rustle of wind in the branches making me twitch and whirl. The flames gradually died down to embers and I began to nod off from sheer exhaustion, my head lolling to my chest. I snapped awake with a gasp, heart pounding wildly. Something had woken me. For a terrifying moment, I couldn't place what. Then I heard it again. A soft footfall, the crack of a twig snapping, just outside the meager pool of dying red light. Something large and stealthy moving in the black woods. I held my breath, mouth dry with fear, ears straining. Another muffled footfall, circling around my vulnerable little camp. Then a chilling sound floating out of the mist. A guttural growl that rose in pitch to an eerie, distorted howl. A terribly human-like cry of rage and hunger. So close now. The cry of the Kushtaka, my mind screamed. I jumped up in panic, fumbling for my flashlight and aiming it at the tree line with a trembling hand. The powerful LED beam sliced through the fog and shadows like a knife, catching the glint of savage yellow eyes hovering between the towering spruces, only for an instant before they blinked out again, vanishing into the darkness. Whatever was out there, it was no animal I had ever encountered. No bear or wolf or cat. It moved upright, almost man-like. But the glimpse of its eyes froze the blood in my veins, cunning, cruel, blazing with a feral intelligence and malice. I panned the flashlight beam wildly through the trees, but saw nothing more, as if the thing could melt into the shadows at will, become one with them. The night itself seemed to come alive around me, reaching out with grasping claws, whispering with distant, mocking laughter that only I could hear. With a deepening horror, I realized my meager supplies had been ransacked as I slept, dragged out of my pack and shredded, the remnants scattered around the edges of the dying firelight. Whatever stalked me, it was toying with me, taunting me, letting me know it could have taken me any time as I foolishly slept. A fresh wave of icy dread washed over me. I had to get out of here now. Grabbing only my flashlight, bear spray, and knife, I plunged wildly into the misty night, fleeing blindly through the tangled undergrowth, trying to escape the predator that hunted me, knowing with grim certainty it was already too late. Thorny devil's club tore at my arms and face as I crashed through the inky forest in blind panic, my breathing ragged, the mad drumming of my heart filling my ears. The flashlight beam danced crazily in my shaking grip, flashing on misty tendrils, grasping branches, shadowy tree trunks flying by. I could hear it behind me, chasing me. The heavy yet eerily agile footfalls, the splintering of greenery, the snarling howls that morphed into furious, distorted cries. I didn't dare look back, didn't dare shine the light behind me, terrified of what I might glimpse, of what I knew was there, gaining on me. A chilling certainty gripped my soul that I was being hunted through the primordial night by something ancient, evil, the Kushtaka of the old man's warning. I ran until my lungs felt coals and my legs were rubber, Unsure where I was going, the forest a blur around me. I had to stop, had to rest. Gasping, I collapsed against the broad trunk of a spruce, struggling to quiet my breathing, to listen. The sounds of pursuit had faded. There was only the eerie stillness, the cool damp and gloom of the haunted woods enveloping me again. I risked a quick sweep with my flickering flashlight, searching for any landmarks, any sign of my pursuer. The beam flashed across something pale on the forest floor nearby. I reached for it with a trembling hand, then recoiled in horror. It was a scrap of torn, bloodied cloth, a piece of clothing. I cast about frantically and found several more shredded fragments scattered about, along with bits of hair and bone. My stomach lurched as the awful truth struck me. These were the grisly remains of one of the missing hikers. They had fled this way too, and met a terrible end, at the claws and teeth of the thing that relentlessly stalked me. A twig snapped behind me so close I spun around with a choked cry. The flashlight clattered to the ground from my nerveless fingers as I stared in shock at the thing emerging from the shadows mere feet away. Not quite beast, not quite human. The form shifting and flowing in the jumping LED light. At once a hulking, lanky wolf walking upright and a grotesque man creature. The Kushtaka in its true malignant form. Yellow eyes glowing with a cruel, savage intelligence bored into mine. Fetid breath washed over me as it loomed closer. Lips peeling back to reveal jagged teeth. Talons scraped the loam as it raised a twisted handpaw to strike. A snarl built in its chest, then rose into an awful parody of human laughter that echoed through the night. Exulting in its impending kill, that chilling sound jolted me from my shocked paralysis. I fumbled for the bear spray, ripping the safety off and aiming it at those blazing, merciless eyes. I squeezed the trigger, the capsaicin spray hissing out in an orange cone enveloping the thing's face. It shrieked and fell back, pawing at its burning eyes in agony. I snatched up the flashlight and ran again, tearing mindlessly through the brush, trying to escape the ancient shape-shifting evil, knowing it was only a matter of time before it recovered, before it resumed the hunt with a vengeance. I fled headlong through the night-shrouded rainforest, thorny undergrowth raking my face and arms, unseen roots sending me sprawling again and again to the spongy ground. Each time I hauled myself up with a strangled gasp and plunged on, knowing my pursuer would not be far behind. That the bear spray had only bought me a bit more time. Before the terrible end, my lungs felt aflame, my pulse hammering in my ears as I crashed wildly through the trees. The flashlight beam flailed before me, flashing on walls of trunk and limb and fog that seemed to reach out with grasping claws. The forest itself had become malevolent, an extension of the evil that hunted me. Just as my rubber legs were about to give out beneath me, the jumping glow of my light fell upon a structure looming out of the mist ahead. I staggered toward it in desperate relief and mounting dread. It was an old log cabin, small and crude, the mossy shake roof sagging under the towering hemlocks that pressed in close around it. I stumbled up the creaking plank steps to the covered porch and tried the rough-hewn door. To my immense relief, it swung inward on rusty hinges. I dove through the opening and slammed the heavy door shut behind me, frantically scanning the dim interior for something to wedge it with. I shoved a thick timber beam laying nearby through the iron brackets, barring the entrance. Then I collapsed back against the door, breath coming in ragged gasps, heart galloping in my chest. The single room was musty and close, lit only by my flashlight beam dancing over the crude log walls and sagging roof beams. A small cast iron stove hunched in the corner, a rickety wooden table and chair set before it. Mildewed animal skin pelts hung on pegs. Dust and cobwebs coated every surface, a thick layer of neglect. The cabin had clearly been abandoned for a long time. As my breathing slowed and my eyes adjusted, other details emerged from the shadows. A tattered wool blanket on the dirt floor as if used as a sleeping pallet, bits of desiccated food and wrappers littering the table. And most chilling of all, a scattering of trekking gear and supplies. Backpacks, dented cookware, coils of rope, a rusting knife, all hauntingly familiar. With a sinking feeling, I examined them more closely. The realization struck me like a gut punch. These were the belongings of the missing hikers who had vanished without a trace in the area. They had sought refuge here too, barricaded themselves inside these rough-hewn walls, desperately trying to survive the thing that relentlessly stalked them, as I had just done. With rising horror, I saw the deep gouges scarring the logs by the door, the raking claw marks shredding the pelts, the dark rust-colored stains splashed and smeared everywhere. The signs of a terrible struggle, of a doomed last stand against the primal evil that even now prowled outside, seeking entry, seeking to finish the hunt. Among the detritus, a faded leather-bound journal caught my eye on the floor, pages spilling out. With a trembling hand, I snatched it up, drinking in the spidery handwriting by flashlight. It was a record by the hikers of their increasingly desperate plight. Of their dwindling food, their injuries, their certainty that something unnatural was out there, toying with them, hurting them. The final entry in a different, shakier script chilled my blood. It's not an animal. Not human either. The Kushtaka is real, the old native stories are true. Shapeshifter, skin crawler, takes the form of a man, mimics voices, lures you in, then becomes a monster. We're trapped in here, it's right outside, clawing at the walls. Only a matter of time. God help us. There was nothing more. I looked around the grim little cabin with rising dread, the gruesome scene before me foreshadowing my own likely fate. The missing hikers had made their last doomed stand here, and now I was trapped too, just like them, alone against the nameless horror that lurked in the night without, the primal terror that my rational mind couldn't even begin to fathom. From beyond the sealed door, a low growl rose into a hideous, distorted cry. Talons scraped the wood, testing, seeking a weakness. Then the heavy thud of a body hurling against it. The bar shuddered in its brackets but held. For now, the Kushtaka was here. It had found me again, and I had nowhere left to run. I paced the confines of the crude cabin, edgy with panic as the thing outside battered at the door with renewed fury. The thick log walls shook, dust sifting down from the ceiling beams with each shuddering impact. The barricade wouldn't hold for long before those powerful blows. I was trapped in here, exactly where it wanted me. Fighting to steady my ragged breathing, I searched desperately for a weapon, anything that could help me against the primal horror that would soon break through. But there was little left behind by the missing hikers except moldering scraps and broken, useless gear. I clutched my knife in a white-knuckled grip, knowing it would do scant good against a monster out of a nightmare. A flicker of movement in my peripheral vision made me whirl toward the cabin's single grimy window with a choked gasp. A dark shape loomed there, motionless, silhouetted by the ghostly moonlight filtering through the trees. My blood turned to ice water as I registered the form. Not quite human, not quite beast. The Kushtaka. It seemed to stare directly at me through the smeared pane, eyes glowing yellow with cunning and malice. Then the shape began to shift and change, convulsing obscenely, flowing like protean clay into the twisted body of an emaciated wolf walking upright, then back into its monstrous man shape. I couldn't tear my gaze away, hypnotized by abject horror as the thing continued to transform. Its face melted, features rearranging into an all-too-familiar visage, my own face, mimicking me now with a grotesque leer, taunting me with my impending demise at its hands. Its unearthly howls pierced the night, paralyzing me to the marrow. The door behind me gave way with an explosion of splinters as the Kushtaka smashed through. I spun to face it, backed against the wall, knife raised in futile defiance. In its natural form now, towering and cadaverous, a hellish fusion of man and beast, it stalked toward me. Claws scraped the dirt floor, arms spread wide, savage teeth bared in a death rictus. "No one will ever find you out here," it rasped in a hideous parody of a human voice, just like the others. "You'll vanish without a trace. Food for the Kushtaka." With those words, it lunged at me, a blur of shadow and tooth and fur, huge talons swiping for my throat. I hurled myself sideways with a yell, feeling claws slice my sleeve, my arm. I slashed back wildly with the knife, catching its flank, black blood spurting. The creature roared in pain and fury, wheeling back to strike again. The confines of the tiny cabin hampered its ferocious swipes and lunges, giving me scant room to dodge its attacks. But I knew I was only postponing the inevitable. It was too fast, too strong, a primeval horror that couldn't be fought. I feinted toward the open door, intending to make a break for it. But the beast cut me off, slamming me back against the wall, putrid breath washing over me. "Now you die, Two Legs," it grated, eyes blazing into mine, claws sinking into my shoulders. I could only stare back in paralyzed terror as it yanked me towards its yawning, bristling maw, my scream freezing in my throat. This was the end. I squeezed my eyes shut as the Kushtaka dragged me in, steeling myself for the agony of its teeth ripping into my flesh. The cabin seemed to recede, the stinking breath of the beast filling my nostrils, the vice grip of its claws crushing my shoulders. My scream was trapped in my constricting throat as I waited for the first stab of pain, the crunch of jaws snapping my spine. But the grisly bite never came. The pressure on my shoulders abruptly released, and I dropped heavily to the floor as an ear-splitting howl of anguish split the air. My eyes flew open to see the Kushtaka staggering back, pawing at the hilt of the knife protruding from its heaving chest. Black ichor pulsed from the wound, spattered the walls. In its murderous gloating, the creature had drawn me right onto the blade, still clutched forgotten in my numb fist. I had unwittingly stabbed it to the hilt when it pulled me into its embrace. The Kushtaka thrashed and writhed, its body twisting and breaking obscenely, shifting from beast to almost man, and back again. Unearthly shrieks pealed from its throat, a keening of agony and fury that pierced to the marrow. My paralysis broke and I lunged to my feet, slipping in the spreading pool of ichor. I wrenched my knife free in a spray of reeking gore and plunged it in again and again as the creature flailed at me, talons catching my flesh. But the wounds were already mortal. The Kushtaka crumpled to the floor, still shifting and bucking, yellowish eyes flickering. "Two legs, think you've won?" It gasped wetly through the ruin of its maw. A chilling rattle of laughter burbled up in its chest. "I am eternal. There will always be the hunger, the hunt. You cannot kill." The Kushtaka. With a final shudder, the fading light snuffed out of its eyes and it lay still, human-shaped in death. The miasma of evil that had choked the air seeped away, leaving only the musk of blood and loam. Dawnlight began to filter in through the trees as I stumbled out of that abattoir cabin into the misty forest, shaking uncontrollably, sticky with the creature's foul lifeblood. I ran, fleeing the scene of primal horror, desperate to put distance between myself and the lingering malevolence that saturated those woods. To reach the lakeshore, find the search plane, escape back to the rational world. But even as I emerged into a morning that seemed too bright, too normal after the nightmare, a thought coiled coldly in the back of my mind, one that would never quite let me go. The Kushtaka's last words. Its dying promise, that it was undying, unchanging, as old as the ancient forests and glaciers, a spirit of hunger, of the hunt. There would always be the Kushtaka. I had won this battle through luck and desperation, walked out of that shadow when those before me had fallen. But had I truly defeated the Kushtaka? Was it even something that could be vanquished? Or had I merely postponed my fate, staying one step ahead of its tireless pursuit? As I sank to my knees on the pebbled lakeshore, shaking with exhaustion and delayed reaction, a haunting cry drifted through the trees behind me. A wolf's howl, undulating higher into a distorted, almost human keen, mocking laughter on the misty breeze. I clapped my hands over my ears, hunching into myself, praying that the plane arrived soon, praying that the hunt was over. But knowing in my ravaged soul that it had only just begun, that I could never stop glancing over my shoulder, wondering when the Kushtaka would find me again, wondering if I would escape a second time. I knew something was horribly wrong the moment I saw that mangled ranger vest halfway up a hidden ledge deep in the backcountry. The thick stench of decay clung to the air, and I could sense a vicious presence no training could prepare me for. There was no logic to the way the fabric had been shredded or how the rocky path seemed gouged by some unnatural force. You might doubt me, but what happened next changed my life in ways I'm still coming to terms with. My name is Marcus Kane, and this happened to me back in 2017 in Blackstone Canyon National Park. I was a new recruit then, 3 months into my job as a search and rescue officer for the United States Forest Service. At 24, I thought I'd seen enough of the wilderness growing up in rural Montana to handle anything these canyons could throw at me. Blackstone looked peaceful at first glance. Rolling prairies dotted with ancient pines, limestone cliffs that caught the morning light like cathedral walls, and the famous underground caverns twisting for miles beneath the surface. The park attracted serious cavers and weekend hikers alike. Most came for the scenic overlooks and marked trails, but others sought the thrill of exploring unmapped passages that honeycombed the canyon depths. That's where we came in, when someone's adventure turned into a nightmare. The rest of the team seemed eager to show me the ropes when I first arrived. Robert Hayes, our senior officer, had spent 15 years scouring these hills and caves. His weathered face told stories of countless rescues, and his methodical approach had saved dozens of lives. Then there was Sarah Walsh, a bright-eyed rescue specialist just a month more experienced than me. We'd bonded over our shared rookie status, trading jokes about sleeping in the staff bunkhouses and competing to see who could read topographic maps faster. That morning started like any other. Dawn brought a thick blanket of fog that hugged the canyon floor, and the early sun struggled to pierce the gray shroud. I was finishing my coffee in the ranger station when the phone rang. The desk sergeant took the call with practiced efficiency, scribbling notes on his incident pad. "Missing hiker," he announced to the room. "Jake Morrison, 32, from Denver. Never returned from an overnight trip. Vehicle's still in the parking lot." Robert looked up from his duty roster. "How long overdue?" 18 hours. He signed out for the old service tunnel system, Sector 7. My stomach tightened. Sector 7 was notorious among the rescue teams. The tunnels there dated back to early mining operations, creating a maze of unstable passages that connected to natural cave systems. It was technically off-limits to casual hikers, but some ignored the warnings. "Kane, Walsh," Robert called out. "You two take point on this one. I'll coordinate from here and send backup if needed." Sarah grabbed her gear bag and shot me a grin. "Ready for some real action?" I nodded, trying to project confidence I didn't entirely feel. We checked our equipment: ropes, headlamps, first aid supplies, emergency flares, and portable radios. Standard rescue gear for what should have been a routine recovery operation. Morrison left his planned route with the front desk, Sarah said, studying the map. He was interested in exploring what he called virgin passages, areas that hadn't been fully surveyed. The morning air carried a strange tension as we drove toward the trailhead. Other rangers had mentioned unusual animal behavior lately: deer avoiding certain areas, birds going silent near specific canyon sections. I'd chalked it up to seasonal changes, but now those reports seemed more ominous. The trail leading to Sector 7 started innocuously enough. Rabbits darted between sagebrush and dew glistened on the low-lying junipers. But as we hiked deeper into the canyon, the landscape began to change. The vegetation grew sparse and the rock formations took on twisted, unnatural shapes. "Ever been down this far before?" Sarah asked, adjusting her pack straps. "Once, during training," I replied. "Robert brought me out here to show me the danger zones. Said this sector had the highest incident rate in the park." About 2 miles in, we found Morrison's campsite. His blue dome tent stood abandoned in a small clearing, the flap hanging open like a mouth frozen mid-scream. Inside, we discovered evidence of a hasty departure: sleeping bag wadded up, half-eaten packet of granola scattered across the tent floor, and a single hiking boot discarded near a cluster of rocks. Sarah knelt beside the boot, examining the laces. "These weren't untied," she said. "They were torn." I circled the campsite, looking for tracks or signs of struggle. The ground was too rocky to hold clear footprints, but I noticed disturbed stones and scuff marks leading toward a narrow ravine. "Morrison," I called out, my voice echoing off the canyon walls. No response. Sarah radioed our position to Robert. His voice crackled through the static. "Copy that. Any signs of injury or foul play?" "Unclear," Sarah responded. "Campsite shows signs of rapid departure. We're following a possible trail toward the service tunnel entrance. Be careful down there." Robert's voice carried an edge I hadn't heard before. "Radio check every 30 minutes." We pressed deeper into what the locals called Shadow Pass. The canyon walls seemed to lean inward here, blocking out most of the midday sun. Sarah's usually cheerful demeanor grew subdued as we navigated the increasingly treacherous terrain. "I don't like how quiet it is," she whispered, her words barely audible above our footsteps. She was right. The normal sounds of wildlife had vanished completely. No bird calls, no insects, no rustle of small animals in the brush. Even the wind seemed muted, as if the canyon itself was holding its breath. We found the first piece of Morrison's equipment about a quarter mile from his camp, an expensive GPS unit smashed against a boulder. The LCD screen was spiderwebbed with cracks, and the case bore deep gouges that looked disturbingly like claw marks. "No animal I know makes marks like that," Sarah said, photographing the damaged device. The stench hit us next, a sour organic smell that made my eyes water. It reminded me of spoiled meat mixed with something else, something I couldn't identify, but that triggered an instinctive revulsion. That's when we found the shredded vest. It lay tangled in a cluster of sharp rocks about 50 feet above the trail, as if it had been hurled there with tremendous force. The fabric was torn in long, parallel lines, and dark stains covered much of the material. A patch on the chest identified it as property of Yellowstone National Park, not one of ours. "How long do you think this has been here?" I asked, using a stick to lift a corner of the vest. Sarah studied the weathering patterns on the fabric. Hard to say. Could be weeks, could be months, but Morrison's only been missing since yesterday. The implications were unsettling. Either this vest belonged to some other victim from long ago, or Morrison had encountered something connected to an earlier tragedy. We spotted the service tunnel entrance not far beyond the vest site. What we found there made us both stop dead in our tracks. The iron gate that should have sealed the tunnel was twisted open, its heavy bars bent outward like the petals of some grotesque metal flower. The concrete frame around the gate bore deep gouges, and chunks of stone lay scattered on the ground. Jesus, Sarah breathed. What kind of force does something like this? The opening gaped before us like a wound in the earth. Cool air flowed out of the darkness, carrying that same putrid stench we'd detected earlier, now concentrated and overwhelming. I clicked on my headlamp and peered into the tunnel. "Morrison," I called. This time my voice didn't echo. It seemed swallowed by the darkness, as if the tunnel absorbed sound. From somewhere in the depths came a faint response. Not words, but a low moan that might have been human. Sarah and I exchanged glances. We both knew what we had to do, even though every instinct screamed at us to turn around and call for backup. "Robert's going to kill us for going in without support," Sarah said, checking her radio one more time. "Only static," answered. "Morrison's down there," I replied. "We can't wait." I tested the stability of the twisted gate and found we could squeeze through the opening. The metal edges were sharp enough to cut, but we managed to slip inside without injury. The tunnel stretched ahead of us, disappearing into absolute darkness. Our headlamps carved out weak cones of light that seemed pathetically inadequate against the pressing blackness. The walls were carved limestone, slick with moisture and covered in an unidentifiable residue that reflected our lights with an oily sheen. "Stay close," I whispered to Sarah, though I wasn't sure why I was whispering. Our footsteps echoed strangely in the confined space, creating distorted sounds that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The tunnel sloped downward at a gentle angle, taking us deeper into the heart of the canyon. After about 50 yards, we came to our first junction. 3 passages branched off from the main tunnel, each disappearing into darkness. I was studying my map when Sarah grabbed my arm. "Look at this," she said, training her light on the limestone wall. Carved into the stone was a rough inscription, "J. Morrison," followed by what looked like an arrow pointing toward the left passage. But the carving appeared unfinished, as if Morrison had been interrupted mid-task. Below the inscription, dark drops led deeper into the left tunnel. "Blood?" Sarah asked. I knelt and examined the stains without touching them. "Looks like it. Still relatively fresh." The left passage was narrower than the main tunnel, forcing us to walk single file. The walls seemed to press closer with each step, and the ceiling dropped low enough that I had to duck in places. That's when we heard it. A scraping sound from somewhere ahead, like fingernails dragging across stone. It came in irregular bursts, sometimes close, sometimes distant, always just beyond the reach of our lights. "Morrison?" I called out but received no answer. The scraping stopped abruptly, replaced by a silence so complete it felt like a physical presence. We stood frozen, listening, waiting for something to happen. Then, from the darkness ahead, came a sound that raised every hair on my body, a wet, dragging noise, as if something large was being pulled across the rough stone floor. Sarah's hand found mine in the darkness, her grip tight with fear. We stood there, 2 rookie rescue workers, about to face something that no amount of training could have prepared us for. The sound was getting closer. The dragging sound stopped just beyond our light, leaving us stranded in a silence that felt hostile. My heart hammered against my ribs as I swept my headlamp beam back and forth, searching for the source of the noise. "There," Sarah whispered, pointing to a section of wall about 20 feet ahead. I focused my light where she indicated and saw fresh scratch marks gouged into the limestone, deep furrows that ran from ceiling to floor. Whatever had made them possessed incredible strength and claws that could carve stone like soft wood. We pressed forward, following the sporadic blood trail and Morrison's increasingly erratic scratch marks on the walls. The passages here formed a maze of interconnected tunnels, some natural caves formed by water erosion, others clearly carved by human hands decades ago. "The mining surveys from the 1940s show this area," I said, consulting my map again. "But these passages extend far beyond what's documented." Sarah nodded, training her light on another set of Morrison's carvings. This one read, "Something following," and below it, "Help me." "How long has he been down here?" she asked. "Official report says 18 hours, but these carvings..." I studied the fresh cuts in the stone. Some of these look older. Days, maybe weeks. The implication sent a chill through me. Either Morrison had been trapped down here much longer than anyone realized, or someone else had been carving his name. We found more of his equipment scattered throughout the passages. A torn backpack, a smashed water bottle, and most disturbing, a digital camera with deep claw marks across the display. When I tried to access the memory card, the device was too damaged to function. The tunnel opened into a larger chamber, and our lights revealed something that made us both gasp. The walls were covered in markings, hundreds of them scratched and carved at different depths and ages. Some were clearly human, names, dates, messages of desperation. Others were different, alien scratches that formed no recognizable pattern. "Helpa," Sarah read from one wall. "Been here 6 days. This one says it took Jennifer." I illuminated another section and found older markings, some dating back to the 1960s and 70s. "Look at this, the thing in the deep. And here, don't go to the bottom levels." In the center of the chamber, we discovered a collection of abandoned gear from multiple time periods. Rusted camping equipment from decades past mixed with more recent items, GPS units, modern climbing gear, clothing that still held the smell of fear and desperation. "This isn't just about Morrison," Sarah said, her voice barely a whisper. "People have been disappearing here for years." A new sound echoed through the chamber, a rhythmic tapping like Morse code but following no pattern I recognized. It seemed to come from the walls themselves, as if something was moving within the stone. We followed the sound to an opening in the far wall, partially concealed by fallen rocks. The passage beyond was different from the others, completely natural, formed by water over millennia. Flowstone formations created bizarre shapes that cast grotesque shadows in our lights. "Morrison's trail leads this way," I said, noting fresh blood drops on the stone formations. The passage sloped steeply downward, taking us deeper into the earth. The air grew noticeably cooler and our breath began to fog. The walls here wept constantly, creating a steady drip that echoed like a metronome counting down to something terrible. After what felt like an hour of descent, we entered a vast underground chamber. Our headlamps couldn't find the far walls or ceiling. The space swallowed our lights completely. The sound of running water came from somewhere in the darkness, and the air carried a mineral taste that coated our tongues. "Jesus Christ," Sarah breathed. "How far down are we?" I checked my altimeter. Nearly 200 feet below the surface. This isn't on any map I've ever seen. We picked our way carefully across the uneven floor, following Morrison's blood trail toward the sound of water. The chamber was strewn with more abandoned equipment, some of it so old it was barely recognizable. Pieces of rope that crumbled at a touch, metal buckles green with verdigris, and scattered bones that might have been animal remains, or might not have been. The water sound led us to an underground stream that disappeared into another passage. Next to the stream we found Morrison's most recent camp, if it could be called that. His sleeping bag lay torn and bloody, and his remaining supplies were scattered as if thrown in haste. But Morrison himself was nowhere to be seen. "The blood trail continues," Sarah noted, training her light on drops that led toward yet another tunnel opening. This one was different, perfectly round, as if bored through the rock by some enormous machine. From within came the sound we'd been dreading. A wet, sliding noise accompanied by labored breathing that was definitely human. "Morrison," I called out. "Jake Morrison, can you hear me?" A weak voice answered from the darkness. "Help. Please help me." We exchanged glances and plunged into the round tunnel. This passage was uncomfortably narrow, forcing us to crawl on hands and knees. The walls were smooth and slick, covered in the same oily residue we'd noticed earlier. The tunnel curved and twisted for what felt like an eternity before opening into a small chamber. There we found him. Jake Morrison sat propped against the far wall, pale as death with a deep gash across his ribs. Dark stains covered his torn clothing, and his eyes held the hollow stare of someone pushed beyond their breaking point. "Thank God," he whispered when our lights found him. I thought it was coming back." Sarah immediately began treating his wounds while I examined the chamber. This space showed clear signs of occupancy, not by Morrison but by something else. Strange materials were embedded in the walls. Fragments of bone and metal, bits of fabric from different time periods, and items I couldn't identify. "Jake, what happened to you?" I asked, kneeling beside him. "How long have you been down here?" His eyes focused on me with difficulty. "Days. Maybe a week?" I lost track after the second night. "It comes when it's dark." "Always when it's dark. What comes?" Sarah asked, bandaging his wounds. Morrison's grip tightened on my arm. "It's tall. Too tall for a person. And the way it moves." He shuddered, like it doesn't have proper joints. Like it's made of rubber and bone. I felt my skin crawl. "Is it an animal?" "No." Morrison's voice was emphatic. "It wears clothes. Old clothes, like from different time periods. Pieces of what it's taken." Sarah and I exchanged worried glances. Morrison was clearly traumatized, possibly hallucinating from blood loss and dehydration. "We need to get you out of here," I said. "Can you walk?" Morrison attempted to stand but immediately collapsed. "I don't think so." It did something to my leg. Twisted it. As Sarah examined his leg, I explored the chamber more thoroughly. In one corner, I found a collection of personal items. Watches, jewelry, identification cards dating back decades. Driver's licenses from the 1970s, a military dog tag from Vietnam, wedding rings still stained with dried blood. The implications hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't just Morrison's attacker. It was a killer that had been operating for decades, collecting trophies from its victims. "We need to leave, now." I helped Sarah lift Morrison, supporting him between us. That's when we heard it, a sound that would haunt my dreams for years to come. From somewhere in the passages behind us came a noise like nothing in nature. A wet, grinding howl that seemed to originate from multiple throats at once. Morrison went rigid with terror. "It's coming," he whispered. "Oh God, it's coming back." The sound echoed through the tunnels, growing closer with each repetition. And behind it I could hear something else, the scraping of claws on stone and a rhythmic thudding that might have been footsteps. But they weren't footsteps like anything human. We had to move fast, but Morrison's injuries made him nearly dead weight. As we struggled through the narrow tunnel, I could hear our pursuer getting closer. The scraping sounds were accompanied now by a wet breathing that seemed to fill the passage behind us. "Don't look back," I warned Sarah, though I was fighting the urge myself. We reached the larger chamber just as our pursuer entered the tunnel behind us. I caught a glimpse of something impossible, an elongated form that filled the passage completely, moving with boneless fluidity that defied anatomy. "The rope," Sarah gasped, pointing to a section of climbing rope we'd noted earlier. "If we can reach the upper passages." We dragged Morrison toward the rope, but his injured leg gave out completely. He collapsed, pulling us down with him. The wet breathing was almost upon us now, and I could smell something putrid and wrong, the scent of death and decay, mixed with something alive and hungry. That's when I made a decision that probably saved our lives. I grabbed one of my emergency flares and struck it against the rocky floor. The sudden burst of red light filled the chamber, revealing our pursuer clearly for the first time. What I saw defied every natural law I thought I understood. The flare's crimson light revealed a nightmare that my mind struggled to process. The creature stood nearly 8 feet tall, its gaunt frame clothed in tatters from different eras. A moldy suit jacket from decades past, torn hiking boots, fragments of ranger uniforms from various parks. But it was the way the clothing hung on its frame that made my stomach lurch. The proportions were all wrong. Arms that stretched too long, hanging past where knees should be. A torso that twisted at impossible angles, as if the spine could bend in ways human anatomy simply didn't allow. The head sat atop an elongated neck, tilted at an unnatural angle that suggested the bones beneath were more suggestion than structure. But it was the face that shattered my sanity. Features that might once have been human were stretched and distorted, like clay that had been pulled by too many hands. The mouth opened too wide, revealing rows of teeth that belonged in the jaws of something that fed on bone and sinew. Eyes that reflected our light with an oily sheen, positioned slightly off-center as if the skull had been compressed and reformed. The creature froze in our flare light, its head swiveling toward us with mechanical precision. For a moment that felt like eternity, we stared at each other across the chamber. I could hear Morrison whimpering behind me and Sarah's sharp intake of breath. Then it moved. The speed was inhuman. One moment it stood motionless. The next it was flowing across the chamber floor like liquid nightmare. Its limbs bent and flexed in ways that hurt to watch, propelling it forward with spider-like grace. "Move!" I shouted, grabbing Morrison under one arm while Sarah took the other. We hauled him toward the tunnel opening, but the creature reached us first. An impossibly long arm swept through the air where my head had been a second earlier. I felt wind from the passage of those elongated fingers, tipped with nails that had grown into yellowed claws. Sarah screamed as the creature's other arm caught her backpack, tearing it from her shoulders with casual strength. Equipment scattered across the chamber floor, medical supplies, food, our backup radio. The flare was beginning to fade, casting dancing shadows that made the creature's movements even more disturbing. In the flickering light, I saw it crouch down and examine our scattered gear with unsettling intelligence. It picked up Sarah's radio and tilted its head, listening to the static. "It's learning," Morrison whispered, his voice thick with terror. "Every time someone comes down here, it learns more." We reached the tunnel entrance, but I knew we'd never outrun this thing carrying Morrison's dead weight. The creature had already proven it could move through these passages faster than we could walk. "Sarah, take Morrison and head for the main tunnel," I ordered. "I'll hold it off." "Like hell," she replied. "We stick together." The creature stood and turned toward us, dropping the radio. In the dying flare light, I saw it cock its head in that mechanical way, as if calculating distances and angles. Then it spoke. "Help me," it said in Morrison's voice, perfect mimicry of his tone and inflection. "Please help me." The sound of Morrison's own words coming from that thing's throat made him sob with terror. But the creature wasn't finished. It cycled through other voices, some I didn't recognize, others that might have belonged to the missing hikers whose belongings we'd found. "We need to get out of here," in a woman's voice that could have been from the 1980s. "Something's wrong with my leg." In the voice of an elderly man, "It's following us," in the terrified whisper of a child. Each voice was perfect, recorded and reproduced with mechanical precision. The creature was using the final words of its victims as a lure, trying to draw in rescuers who might mistake it for someone in need. How many search and rescue teams had it caught that way over the decades? The flare died, plunging us into absolute darkness. Immediately, I heard the creature moving, its claws scraping against stone as it repositioned itself. We had maybe seconds before it reached us. I fumbled for another flare, but my hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip it. Sarah's headlamp swept across the chamber, catching glimpses of movement that suggested the creature was circling us. "There," she shouted, training her light on a section of wall that looked different from the rest. I saw what she meant. Another tunnel opening, partially concealed by flowstone formations. It was our only chance. We dragged Morrison toward the opening just as something massive slammed into the wall behind us. Rock dust showered down, and I heard the grinding sound of claws scraping deep gouges in solid limestone. The new tunnel was even narrower than the others, barely wide enough for one person at a time. We pushed Morrison ahead of us, following him into the constricted space. Behind us, I could hear the creature trying to force its way into the passage. The sounds it made, wet, tearing noises mixed with frustrated howls, suggested it was having difficulty fitting its elongated form into the narrow space. But it was still coming. The tunnel twisted and branched, forcing us to make split-second decisions about which passage to take. Morrison was unconscious now, his breathing shallow and rapid. Sarah and I alternated, supporting his weight, our own strength rapidly depleting. "I can see light ahead," Sarah gasped, pointing to what looked like natural illumination filtering through a crack in the tunnel wall. We pushed toward the light, driven by desperate hope. The tunnel gradually widened, and we emerged into another chamber, this one with a natural opening to the surface far above. Daylight, blessed daylight, filtered down through the opening, but our relief was short-lived. The chamber was a dead end, the walls too smooth and steep to climb. We were trapped. Behind us, the sounds of pursuit grew closer. The creature had managed to navigate the narrow tunnel and was approaching our location. In the natural light filtering from above, I could see more clearly the full extent of this chamber. It was a killing ground. The floor was littered with bones, human bones, scattered and broken. Scraps of clothing from multiple decades lay tangled among the remains. Watches, jewelry, and personal effects created a macabre museum of the creature's victims. And everywhere, scratched into every available surface, were messages of desperation. "It's behind us, Sarah. If you find this, run. Day 3, no food. Can hear it breathing. Tell my family I'm sorry. Sarah saw what I was looking at and went pale. How many people has it killed? Before I could answer, the creature emerged from the tunnel behind us. In the natural light, it looked even more wrong. A patchwork abomination wearing the clothes and identities of its victims. I could see now that some of the fabric it wore bore park service patches from different locations across the country. This thing had been hunting for decades, possibly longer. Moving from park to park, cave system to cave system, always staying ahead of any organized effort to track it down. It approached us slowly now, no longer in a hurry. We had nowhere to run and it knew it. Those oil-slick eyes fixed on us with predatory intelligence, and that impossible mouth stretched into what might have been a smile. Morrison stirred in our arms, opening his eyes just long enough to see the creature bearing down on us. "The flare gun," he whispered. "In my pack. Left it, near the stream." I remembered seeing Morrison's gear scattered by the underground water, but his pack was 3 chambers away, through passages now controlled by this nightmare. The creature spoke again, cycling through its collection of voices. "Help is coming. We're going to get you out of here. Everything's going to be okay." Lies wrapped in the final words of the dead. It reached out with one of those impossibly long arms, claws extended toward Sarah's face. She pressed herself against the chamber wall, eyes wide with terror. That's when I made a decision that surprised even me. Instead of backing away, I stepped forward and grabbed the creature's wrist. Its skin felt wrong, cold and slick with a texture like wet leather. But more disturbing was the way the bones beneath shifted and moved, as if the creature's skeleton was only loosely connected. "You want something to hunt?" I shouted, looking directly into those alien eyes. "Hunt this." I struck a fresh flare and jammed it directly against the creature's torso. The chemical fire caught immediately on its clothing, dry fabric from decades of cave dwelling. Flames spread across its patchwork outfit, and the creature released a shriek that shattered loose stone from the chamber walls. It stumbled backward, clawing at the flames consuming its body. But instead of the agonized death cries I expected, I heard something worse, laughter. The creature was laughing as it burned, a sound like grinding glass that echoed through the chamber. "Run," I shouted to Sarah. "Now!" We dragged Morrison toward the tunnel opening, but the burning creature blocked our path. Flames had spread across most of its body now, yet it continued to move with that same fluid grace. If anything, the fire seemed to energize it. The laughter stopped abruptly, replaced by a new sound, voices calling from the tunnel behind the creature. Human voices distorted by echo and distance. "Marcus! Sarah, where are you?" It was Robert's voice, along with others I didn't recognize. The backup team had finally arrived. But as the voices grew closer, I realized with growing horror that the creature was mimicking them too. Its mouth moved in perfect synchronization with Robert's words, while its burning body blocked our only escape route. It was luring the rescue team directly into its trap. The creature's burning form continued to mimic Robert's voice with perfect precision, calling out search patterns and rescue protocols that would lead our backup team directly into this death chamber. Each word was a countdown to more victims, and we were the only ones who could stop it. "Robert, don't come down here," I shouted toward the tunnel. "It's a trap." My warning echoed through the passages, but I heard boots on stone getting closer. The rescue team was following standard search procedures, moving methodically through the cave system toward the last known position of their missing colleagues. The burning creature turned toward me, its flaming head tilting with that same mechanical curiosity. Despite the fire consuming its patchwork clothing, it showed no signs of pain or weakness. If anything, the flames seemed to reveal more of its true nature, glimpses of mottled skin that shifted and rippled like disturbed water. "Marcus, we're coming to get you," it said in Robert's voice while staring directly at me. "Hold your position." It was testing me, learning my reactions to see how I responded to hearing my supervisor's voice. I realized with sick certainty that it was memorizing my voice too, adding it to its collection for future hunts. Sarah had dragged Morrison to the far side of the chamber, as far as possible from the burning monstrosity. She was trying to bandage his wounds while keeping watch on the creature, but I could see the terror in her eyes. We all understood now that we weren't dealing with an animal. This was something that planned, that learned, that took pleasure in psychological torture. The voices from the tunnel grew louder. "Kane Walsh, sound off!" That was definitely Robert, but how could I tell him the truth? That something was wearing his voice like a mask, that it had been luring victims for decades using the dying words of its prey. The creature began moving toward the tunnel entrance, its burning body leaving a trail of ashes and something that might have been melted flesh. But as it moved, I noticed something crucial. The fire was actually damaging it. The fluid grace was becoming jerky and unnatural, as if the flames were disrupting whatever unholy biology animated it. "Sarah," I hissed, "do you have any accelerant? Anything flammable?" She checked her remaining gear. "Fuel tablets for the camp stove." "Why, this thing burns. Maybe that's how we stop it." The creature reached the tunnel entrance and began calling out in perfect imitation of Robert's search protocol. "Sector 7 clear." Moving to Sector 8, it was directing the rescue team away from our actual location while maintaining the illusion that Robert was still in command. I had to act before it led them into another trap. Grabbing the fuel tablets from Sarah, I lit them with the dying flare and hurled them at the creature's back. The chemical flame spread rapidly across what remained of its clothing, and this time the damage was more severe. I saw sections of its impossible anatomy actually beginning to collapse. The creature spun toward me with a shriek that sounded like tearing metal. Its face, half consumed by flame, had become even more distorted. One eye socket was empty now, weeping a dark fluid that hissed when it hit the stone floor. But it was still mobile, still dangerous. It lunged toward me with both arms extended, claws reaching for my throat. I threw myself sideways, rolling across the bone-littered floor. The creature's claws raked across the stone where I'd been standing, gouging deep furrows in solid rock. "The opening," Sarah shouted, pointing to the natural light shaft above us. "If we can reach it?" I saw what she meant. The chamber walls were rough enough to provide handholds, and the shaft wasn't perfectly vertical. With luck and desperation, we might be able to climb out. But the creature was between us and the wall. From the tunnel came the sound of approaching boots. The real rescue team was getting closer, following the creature's false signals. I had maybe minutes before they walked into whatever trap it had planned. The creature seemed to sense my urgency. It positioned itself directly beneath the light shaft, blocking our escape route while continuing to burn. The flames had consumed most of its stolen clothing now, revealing skin that looked like melted wax stretched over an armature of bone and sinew. "You can't have them," I said, surprising myself with the steadiness of my voice. "I won't let you." It tilted its head at an angle that would have snapped a human neck. "I won't let you," it repeated in my voice, adding my words to its collection. Then it began cycling through voices again. But this time they were all mine. Words I'd spoken during the rescue, twisted into new meanings. "Morrison's down there. We can't wait. We stick together." Each phrase was delivered with my exact intonation, but strung together they created a narrative of betrayal and abandonment. It was learning to weaponize my own voice against my team. The real voices from the tunnel were getting closer now. I could hear Robert calling for us, genuine concern and authority in his tone. Soon he would enter this chamber and face the thing wearing his voice. I couldn't let that happen. Grabbing a piece of broken bone from the floor, something that might once have been a femur, I charged the creature. It moved to intercept me with that boneless fluidity, but the flames had affected its coordination. I managed to drive the sharp end of the bone into its torso before it could grab me. The creature's shriek shattered loose stone from the chamber ceiling. Dark fluid poured from the wound, hissing and smoking where it touched the ground. But the bone weapon was dissolving in the creature's acid blood, eaten away like sugar in water. It backhanded me across the chamber with casual strength. I hit the wall hard enough to see stars and tasted blood in my mouth. But my attack had accomplished something. The creature was now focused entirely on me, ignoring Sarah and Morrison. "Climb," I shouted to Sarah. "Get Morrison to the surface." She hesitated for a split second, then began helping Morrison toward the wall. His injured leg made climbing nearly impossible, but fear provided strength neither of them knew they possessed. The creature advanced on me, half its body consumed by flames but still functioning. Up close I could see that what I'd taken for clothing was actually layers of skin and fabric fused together, trophies from decades of victims worn like a second hide. "Help me," it said in Morrison's voice. "Please help me." Then switching to Sarah's voice, "We stick together." And finally, in Robert's authoritative tone, Kane, report your status. It was trying to break my resolve by using the voices of people I cared about. But instead of weakening me, the psychological assault made me angry. This thing had stolen those voices from the dead, and it was planning to add more to its collection. Behind the creature, I could see Sarah and Morrison making slow progress up the wall toward the light shaft. Morrison was barely conscious, but Sarah was supporting him with grim determination. The real rescue team's voices were almost at the tunnel entrance now. Any second, Robert and his team would enter this chamber. I needed a bigger distraction. Looking around desperately, I spotted something I'd missed before. A pile of old gear that included what looked like climbing rope and hardware from the 1970s. Ancient equipment, but rope was rope. The creature was 10 feet away now, still burning but focused on me with predatory intensity. I dove for the gear pile, grabbing the old rope and a rusted carabiner. The rope was brittle with age, but it might hold long enough. Behind me, I heard Sarah reach the light shaft opening. "Marcus, come on!" The creature spun toward her voice, momentarily distracted. That gave me the opening I needed. I looped the rope around a stalactite formation and rappelled down the chamber wall, swinging like a pendulum directly at the creature's burning torso. The impact sent us both crashing to the ground in a tangle of limbs and flame. The creature's claws raked across my ribs, tearing through my jacket and into flesh. Pain flooded through me, but I managed to wrap the rope around its elongated neck. The creature thrashed wildly, trying to throw me off, but I held on with desperate strength. That's when Robert and his team finally entered the chamber. Jesus Christ. Robert's voice, the real one this time, echoed through the chamber. "What the hell is that thing?" 3 other rangers followed him into the chamber, their lights revealing the full horror of our situation. They saw the burning creature, the bone-littered floor, and me wrapped around a nightmare that shouldn't exist. "Flare gun," I shouted. "Does anyone have a flare gun?" One of the rangers, I recognized him as Tom Williams from the Eastern District, pulled a flare gun from his pack. "Clear out," he shouted. I rolled away from the creature just as Tom fired. The flare struck its center mass, and this time the chemical fire was too intense to survive. The creature's entire form erupted in white-hot flame, its shriek shaking loose stone from the ceiling. It staggered toward the tunnel entrance, still burning, still trying to escape. But the flames had finally done enough damage to its unholy biology. Its legs gave out and it collapsed in the tunnel mouth, blocking the passage with its burning corpse. The smell was indescribable, burned flesh mixed with something chemical and wrong. We all backed away as the flames consumed the last of the creature, leaving nothing but ash and the scattered belongings of its victims. In the sudden silence that followed, I could hear water dripping somewhere in the darkness. Normal sounds. Natural sounds. The nightmare was over. The official report listed Jake Morrison's rescue as a successful operation with complications. That was government speak. For something happened down there that we can't explain and don't want to discuss. The creature that had terrorized Blackstone Canyon for decades was reduced to a footnote about unstable geological conditions and wildlife encounters. Morrison spent 3 weeks in the hospital, recovering from his injuries and psychological trauma. The doctor said his physical wounds would heal completely, but the psychological scars were deeper. He only spoke about his experience once during my visit on his second day of recovery. It wasn't just hunting, he told me, staring at the ceiling with hollow eyes. It was collecting. Every person who went missing, every voice it stole, they were all still there inside it somehow. I could hear them sometimes, whispers in the dark when it thought I was sleeping. He turned to look at me then, and I saw something in his expression that I recognized from my own mirror. How many others like it are out there, Marcus? How many caves have something like that waiting in the dark? I didn't have an answer for him. I still don't. Morrison quit hiking altogether after his discharge. Last I heard, he'd moved to Phoenix and taken a job in an office building with no windows. He sends me a Christmas card every year, always with the same message. Still here. Still watching the lights. Sarah and I dealt with the trauma in our own ways. She threw herself into training, becoming one of the most skilled cave rescue specialists in the service. We'd worked together again on dozens of cases over the years, but we never talked about what we'd seen in that chamber. Some experiences create a bond that goes beyond words. Robert asked us countless questions during the debriefing, but we stuck to the essentials. An animal attack in an unstable cave system. Something had trapped Morrison in the lower chambers. We'd rescued him and the cave had subsequently collapsed during our extraction. The creature's remains were conveniently buried under tons of limestone when the ceiling came down during our escape. And this animal? Robert pressed during one interview. You said it was unlike anything you'd seen before? Unknown species, Sarah replied smoothly. Possibly a new subspecies adapted to cave environments. The remains were too damaged by the collapse to provide useful scientific data. Robert gave us a long, skeptical look. He'd seen enough in his 15 years to know when a story didn't add up. But he also understood that sometimes the truth was too dangerous to put in an official report. The cave system was sealed permanently the following week. Geological instability was the official reason, but Robert made sure the barriers were substantial. Steel gates backed by concrete, with warning signs that went beyond the usual liability disclaimers. I requested a transfer to a different park after the Morrison incident. I told myself it was for career advancement, but the truth was simpler. I couldn't stand being near those caves. Every time I looked toward Sector 7, I imagined I could hear voices calling from underground. Voices that used words I'd spoken, mimicking my own speech patterns to lure new victims. The transfer took me to Olympic National Park in Washington, about as far from underground caves as I could get while staying in the service. The coastal forests and mountain peaks felt clean compared to the claustrophobic tunnels of Blackstone Canyon, but the nightmares followed me. Most nights, I dream I'm back in those passages. Sometimes I'm searching for Morrison again, following blood trails through limestone corridors that twist deeper than they should. Other times, I'm the one being hunted, hearing my own voice calling from the darkness behind me. The worst dreams are the ones where I find the chamber filled with voices I recognize. Sarah's voice calling for help, Robert's voice directing rescue operations that lead nowhere, my own voice recorded during that final confrontation, now used to lure other rescuers into the depths. I started researching missing persons cases in national parks after the Morrison incident. The patterns are disturbing when you know what to look for. Experienced hikers vanishing near cave systems, rescue teams finding abandoned gear but no bodies, witnesses reporting strange animal calls that sound almost human, and always the caves remain sealed afterward. Geological instability appears in report after report, from parks across the country spanning decades. I'm not the only one who knows. There's an informal network of Park Service personnel who've encountered things that don't belong in official reports. We share information carefully, discreetly, a warning about certain cave systems, a heads up about unusual wildlife behavior, a recommendation to seal passages that show signs of instability. We protect people the only way we can by keeping them away from places where things like that creature might still be waiting. 3 years after the Morrison incident, I received a letter forwarded through Park Service channels. No return address postmarked from a small town in Utah. Inside was a newspaper clipping about hikers going missing near a place called Mystery Cave, along with a handwritten note. They found scratch marks on the walls. Human-like but wrong. Sound familiar? Thought you should know. I researched Mystery Cave and found reports dating back to the early 2000s. A caver named Ted Hegeman had documented strange experiences there. Before his blog entries stopped abruptly, the similarities to our Blackstone creature were unmistakable. How many of these things are out there? How long have they been hunting in the deep places where sunlight never reaches? I forwarded the information to Robert through secure channels. 2 weeks later, Mystery Cave was sealed due to structural concerns. No official explanation was ever released. Sarah and I still work together occasionally when cases require our specific expertise. We've developed techniques for identifying potential creature habitats, cave systems with multiple missing persons reports, unusual acoustic properties, and geological formations that could hide the kind of chamber we discovered. We've been responsible for sealing 17 cave systems across 6 states. The official reasons vary: unstable geology, endangered bat colonies, archaeological sensitivity. The real reason is always the same. Something lives in the deep dark that shouldn't exist. Sometimes I wonder if we're fighting a losing battle. For every cave we seal, how many others remain unexplored? How many creatures like the one we killed are still down there, collecting voices and waiting for victims? But then I remember Morrison's voice, weak but grateful, when we pulled him from that chamber. I remember the families who still have loved ones because we stopped something monstrous before it could kill again. The work continues. Sarah runs training seminars for rescue teams now, teaching them to recognize signs of unusual wildlife and when to recommend cave closures. I coordinate between parks, watching for patterns that might indicate new threats. We can't tell people the truth. They wouldn't believe us anyway. But we can protect them from threats they don't know exist. 5 years have passed since Blackstone Canyon. I still wake some nights remembering the way that creature moved, the sound of stolen voices calling from its throat. Morrison was right. Once you've seen something like that, you never stop listening for it in the dark. But I'm still here, still watching, and as long as I am, I'll make sure that others don't have to face what we faced in those tunnels. The official files list the Morrison incident as a successful rescue operation. 3 lives saved, 1 minor injury, no casualties. By any bureaucratic measure, it was a textbook success. We know better. We know that some rescues cost more than what appears in the reports. We know that there are things in the deep places that hunt with intelligence and patience, collecting fragments of their victims to use as weapons against the living. And we know that the only way to fight such monsters is to ensure they never get the chance to hunt again. The caves of Blackstone Canyon remain sealed. The creature that lived there is dead, its collection of stolen voices silenced forever. But somewhere in other deep places, other voices might be calling. We'll be listening for them because someone has to.